You can begin.
Did you say I could go ahead and begin?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. The meeting of the Interdepartmental Serious Mental Illness Coordinating Committee is now called to order. We will now conduct the roll call of the committee members to ensure that we have quorum before we begin. We will start the federal membership in the order outlined in our charter. The federal member or designee representing the agency should state their name and respond here when the agency is called. The Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services.
This is Meena Vaidalingam from HHS, OASH. I'm here. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you.
And Joel Dumanitz from ASPE.
Thank you, Joel. The Assistant Secretary for Mental Health.
Miriam Dolphin-Rittman, SAMHSA.
The Attorney General.
Nicole Ndumale here.
Thank you, Nicole. The Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Sandy Resnick for VA here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Resnick. The Secretary of Department of Defense. The Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The Secretary of Education.
I'm sorry, I couldn't move fast enough. Corey Minor Smith with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Thank you.
Thank you, Corey. The
This
Secretary
is-
of Education.
Yes, this is Megan Whitaker, representing the Department of Education.
Thank you, Megan. The Secretary of the Department of Labor.
Rhonda Basha, representing Assistant Secretary Taryn Williams.
Thank you, Rhonda. The Administrator of Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services.
Kirsten Baronio, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services.
Thank you, Chris. The Administrator of the Administration for Community Living.
Hi, this is Elliot Kennedy here.
Thank you, Elliot. And the Commissioner of the Social Security Administration.
Sorry, this is Taffy McCoy for SSA.
Thank you, Dr. McCoy. Now we will conduct a roll call of the non-federal public members going in alphabetical order. Please respond here when your name is called. Trinidad Rejusis Arguelloa.
Here.
Ron Bruno.
Here.
David Covington. Brian Hepburn.
Here.
Jennifer Higgins.
Here.
Joanna Candle.
Here.
Stephen Lightman.
I'm here. Thank you.
Adrian Lightfoot.
Here.
Amanda Lip.
I'm here. Thank you.
Sue Smith.
Here.
Wanola Sprague. Ruthelia Stroud. And Catherine Woburton. Thank you. We have a quorum. As a reminder, today's meeting is being live streamed. Please place all electronic devices on silent mode. Virtual speakers are reminded to please state your name at the start of your comments so that the transcriptionist and writer can capture your information. I will now turn the meeting over to the Interdepartmental Serious Mental Illness Coordinating Committee Chair, Dr. Marian Dolphin-Rittman.
Thank you so much, Pam, and good morning, everyone. So looking forward to our meeting and just the time to be able to update and to get into a number of different areas. We have a truly packed agenda. I just want to again just thank everyone for your service on ISMIC. We so appreciate your partnership and your working with us on this important committee. I'm now going to turn the meeting over real quickly to Pam, who's going to take us through the minutes. And then I'll have a bit more to say by way of updates and a couple other areas that we want to share in terms of things happening at SAMHSA. But just wanted to welcome everyone. And again, looking forward to our meeting together. So Pam, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Delphin-Rittman. So everyone should have received a copy of the March 14th meeting minutes from me for review. Does anyone have any comments or questions on the minutes before we move forward? Great. Now we will entertain a motion to accept the minutes. May I please
move that
have a
we accept
motion
the minutes.
to accept the minutes?
I move that we accept the minutes of March 14th, 2023. Jennifer Higgins.
Thank you, Dr. Higgins. May I have a second motion to accept the minutes?
Ron Bruno. Second.
Thank you. Would all the ISMIC members unmute themselves? All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Thank you. The minutes are accepted. Thank you. I will now turn the meeting agenda back over to Dr. Delphin-Rittman.
All right, thank you so much, Pam. And so I've got a set of slides I'm going to go through real quick. Just wanted to share with you all a number of updates in terms of some areas of work happening across SAMHSA. Next slide. These are some of the areas I'll cover. We'll cover some data in terms of reports and other areas of work within CBISC. We'll talk about some of the work within the policy lab, talk a little bit about our strategic plan. We were so thrilled to be able to give that wings. It is now officially out. And so we'll talk a little bit about that process and where we landed and a number of our priority and cross-cutting areas. We'll also provide an update in terms of 988 and what things are looking like now. We're just over a year in. And so wanted to share some of what things are looking like at this point. Next slide. So in terms of data, we'll go right to the next slide. Wanted to share a new report that actually was released just last week, actually. So this is truly hot off the presses. And so it's our mental health client level data. And this report summarizes data within the mental health block grant. So really quite a bit of data from across the country, all of our mental health block grant grantees, and it gets at these are just some of the examples of data that it summarizes. So for example, the number of clients receiving mental health services. Also, it summarizes our NOMs, so our national outcome measures. And then it looks at data with respect to the top 5 mental health diagnoses for both children and adults. So it's really quite a rich report. It is available on our website, so do take a look at that. Next slide. Real quickly, just some of the data points from this. So example 1, data point that we saw from this report is about 99.4% of children in treatment receive services at a community mental health center, so community-based programs. And then we also saw about 97.1% of adults receive treatment also within community-based programs. And really, we would expect this. I mean, this data, again, is summarizing data from our community mental health block grant. So we are seeing that people are accessing services at community-based programs. Next slide. On this slide here, we wanted to just direct your attention to one area of finding within the report, and that is some of our findings related to employment. What the report shows is that among individuals with SMI, so serious mental illness, we see about 44% are not in the labor force and about 30% are unemployed. And so, you know, when we think about recovery, we often talk about how employment and being in the labor market is such a valuable part and an important part of the recovery process. You know, I highlight this because I know one of the work groups, our treatment and recovery work group of the ISMIC, is looking at and has identified supported employment as an important area of work. So I just wanted to highlight some of this new data that we see from our mental health CDL or CLD report. Next slide. The other report I wanted to share is for the first time we've released a recovery from substance use and mental health among adults in the United States. So essentially what this report is it looks at some of our NSDA data specifically for people who report that they're in recovery. And so really excited to be able to launch this report. We released it during Recovery Month. We actually tagged it onto the Mobilize Recovery, the last day of the Mobilize Recovery event. 3-day event that was at the Mayflower Hotel in DC. So it was wonderful to have, you know, just a broad a broad audience in terms of individuals who were already participating in the mobilized recovery, but to be able to be with us for the launch of this report. Real quickly, just some of the data that is within this report. Some of the data show that about 72%, next slide, about 72% of people who identified ever having a substance use problem reported they were in recovery. And about 66.5% of people ever having reported a mental health problem noted that they were in recovery. And so the report summarizes a number of other areas. So do take a look at it in terms of how people, other correlates of recovery. The other thing, stay tuned. We will soon be releasing our NSDA. So we're really excited about that. The NSDA team has been steeped in summarizing the findings for the 2022 results. So stay tuned, that will be coming soon. Next slide. So also want to talk a little bit about the policy lab and share some updates there. Next slide. So as you all know, we are currently under a continuing resolution until November 17th. And so what that means is that we're currently functioning on and working off of our FY23 budget. What's happening in terms of the House and the Senate is currently both the House and the Senate are working on separate appropriation bills. And so, we anticipate that we know the House is stuck in committee, the Senate, they did pass their bill. And so a number of things in process there. In addition to that, there are a number of SAMHSA authorizations that still have to happen. And so you'll see a number of programs that still need to be authorized. And so many of those are currently waiting to be reauthorized, many of our programs. So PPW, you see the long list there. And so we are hoping that those are passed soon as well. Next slide. Also wanted to share just a number of reports. The Policy Lab is working on a number of reports that should be out in the coming months and over the course of the year as well. One report which we're really excited about is best practices for successful reentry from criminal justice settings for people with mental health or substance use conditions. And so that should be coming out soon. We also have a report looking at the identification and management of mental health symptoms and conditions associated with long COVID. And so this is a continuation of our long COVID work that's been happening within the center and really across the department. This is an area of focus as well, looking at long COVID. We also have a guide that will be released looking at trauma-informed approaches. So this will be a practical guide looking at the implementation of trauma-informed approaches. And then finally, we'll be releasing a fidelity guide related to assertive community treatment. So really current issues and innovations. So stay tuned for those documents. They should be coming out soon as well. Next slide. So I wanted to talk now about, let me see. Oh, yes. Okay. So another part of the Policy Lab is our CFRI. So our Center for Behavioral Health Financing and Integration. And so within that center, there's quite a bit of work that looks at sort of financing and both within the behavioral health integration space and really across behavioral health. And so a couple of resources and products that will be developed soon will focus on topics such as the benefits and costs of school-based mental health programs. So really doing a cost-benefit analysis there, looking at the financing of medications for opioid use disorder and some of the patterns and trends there. And you'll see some of the other areas, the effectiveness, cost effectiveness of competency to stand trial evaluations. So excited about that work that's coming up within the CFRI program. Next slide. So also want to give an update about our strategic plan. We did release this about a month ago or so, and wanted to take you through just a little bit of the process. It was quite a long process. And so grateful for the range of comments and support and feedback that we got as we were developing it. There were a number of sort of key policy drivers that we really kept in mind as we were developing the plan and sort of thinking about, how we really want to sort of encapsulate our areas of focus and areas of work moving forward. It is a 3-year plan, so from 2023 to 2026. And these were some of the key drivers, certainly within the White House, the Unity Agenda, the ONDCP work, the mental health fact sheet that came out recently. All of these areas were areas that we certainly kept in mind as we were thinking about, moving forward. Certainly wanted to align also with the overdose prevention strategies, with the HHS strategic plan, and then you'll see many of the congressional areas that informed our work as well. Next slide. So this was our timeline. It again was a journey to get to finally being able to give it wings. Started in March with just an initial template around our initial plan that summarized some of the areas of interest, and then ultimately we put it out for public comment. That went out for public comment in April. Got quite a bit of feedback, and I'll share some of the feedback that we received, and we did make changes based on the feedback. And then ultimately, we're in the process now of putting together different performance measures and indicators. The final plan actually went out in August, and so now we're thinking about the implementation and the metrics to be able to ensure that we're moving it forward. And so we're excited about that part, really asking ourselves what pieces, like how do we want to quantify, knowing that we got there in terms of the different areas that we put together and that we prioritized. Next slide. So this slide here is summarizes just some of the feedback and just the numbers of commenters that we received when and comments that we received when we put it out for public comment. In total, there were about 210 commenters. There were about 656 different comments, so quite a bit of work went into really sifting through. We read every single comment that comes in, and then we categorize it too in terms of some of the positive sentiments, the constructive sentiments. We categorize it even in terms of the different priority areas and cross-cutting areas. And so really commend the policy lab and really across SAMHSA team as we sifted through this range of information to be able to really ensure that we were taking in the public comment that we were getting. Next slide. So these are just some of the high-level summary of some of the areas that were discussed as gaps, and then some of the positive feedback. One of the things we heard was that there was a lack of focus on prevention, that people really wanted more upfront language, indicating that we're prioritizing prevention work. There's also comments related to a lack of specific approaches addressing serious mental illness. And so it was important for us to be able to address that as well. You'll see some of the other areas: lack of focus on preventing entrance in criminal and juvenile legal systems, lack of focus on social determinants of health, things like housing, transportation, and then also a lack of focus on special populations, so geriatric populations. And so it was important for us to sort of look at those areas, and as we were developing our different implementation areas to incorporate some of that feedback. And then there's quite a bit of positive feedback, a lot of comments about 988, a lot of appreciation around incorporating children, youth, and families into the plan, a lot of appreciation around a focus on integrating primary care and behavioral health, discussions around sort of keeping or creating multiple entryways into care and taking a total person approach to care. So just a quick summary of some of the feedback that we received. Next slide. So in addition to that, what we did is we added 5 additional goals and subsequent objectives. And so it was a 50% increase. We did begin with 10. So we increased the number of goals to be able to reflect those areas. We also did revise 2 of the priorities based on the specific feedback, and you'll see it. The next slide, I'll go through what some of those revisions are. We also addressed the relevant staff and public comments by incorporating those throughout the plan. And then we did a draft additional content to support the new goals and objectives. Next slide. So in terms of our mission and vision, so we did add some additional language here, and this is where we ended with the mission and vision. Some of the goal with this was we really wanted to incorporate language around people thriving, that our work is not just about addressing mental health and substance use challenges and taking a prevention approach, but also focusing our work on ensuring that people can achieve well-being and can thrive. And so that was really important language that we wanted to add to the vision as in terms of how we're sort of thinking about our work moving forward. Next slide. So this is where we ended up in terms of the different priority areas. So again, the prevention language we added in terms of preventing substance use and overdose. And so initially that was, I think, address overdose or reduce overdose, where we added that prevention language in. And then another area where we added specific language was in terms of the enhancing access to suicide prevention and mental health services. You know, we really felt it was important to add the mental health services part in there. So prior it was enhance access to suicide prevention and crisis care. And so instead we changed it to enhance access to suicide prevention and mental health services, and felt that that last piece was really important because we know that some of the work that we're doing now with 988 and really a lot of our work within the Center for Mental Health Services is around continuing to expand and really build out the mental health service continuum. Certainly the CCBHC work is part of that. And so we wanted to be able to address the broader mental health work that's happening across SAMHSA as well. And then you'll see our cross-cutting areas. Next slide. I'll go real quickly through some of the priority areas in terms of some of the goals. So within the first goal priority area, preventing substance use and overdose, some of what we're focusing on there are the 4 pillars of the HHS overdose prevention strategy. You know, we figured a lot of work went into that, working across different agencies within HHS, and so thought it made sense to really have that be a key center point of the work within this particular goal area. So again, looking at primary prevention, harm reduction, evidence-based treatment, and recovery support. Next slide, please. In terms of enhancing access to suicide prevention and mental health services, you know, a key part of that, again, was, you know, helping people to connect to needed services and supports, helping people ultimately to be able to, you know, achieve well-being and thrive, to get connected to needed services and supports across the continuum. Next slide. In terms of our third priority area, addressing the resilience and emotional health of children, youth, and families. Some of the key areas within that priority area includes matching each child to the right intervention at the right time. We know timing is so critical and early intervention is critical. Working upstream early in the risk trajectory, we know that is critical. And then reliance on systems of care. Because we know taking a systems of care approach is so critical in children's mental health related work. Next slide. And then in terms of our fourth slide, integrating behavioral health and physical health care, these are the key areas of work within that, really focusing and leaning in on our grant programs, continuing to provide a broad range of technical assistance and training to providers, and then a number of policy activities around and continue to step up policy activities within this area. Next slide. Just looking at our time. In terms of the last area, you know, strengthening the behavioral health workforce. This is an area that was actually added as a goal. Initially, this was one of our cross-cutting areas. In our interim plan, we added this as a goal because increasingly we're seeing that workforce remains a challenge area. There's current HRSA data that suggests by 2025, we might be over 30,000 FTEs short. And so some of our work within this area includes, you know, strengthening the existing workforce. We know that that is important. And so we're focused on continuing to offer a broad range of training and technical assistance. Also expanding the use of paraprofessional and peers. We did release the peer certification model standards. And so, I have plenty of time. Okay, I thought I had, that's helpful. Thank you, Belina. I thought I had just about a few minutes left. So trying to keep us on, schedule.
We left it flexible. Please take your time.
Awesome. So, you know, an area that we were really interested in is just expanding the paraprofessional and peer workforce. And so earlier in the year, release the peer certification standards and model standards. And what we're hearing with those guidelines is already there's quite a bit of uptake. And so really pleased that those guidelines, so they're actually guidelines, not standards, that they've been useful. Also better utilization of telehealth. We know that telehealth and other technologies can truly help to expand access to behavioral health providers, particularly within rural areas and other areas where there are health service or provider shortage areas. So that's an additional area of focus. And then, of course, increasing the diversity and cultural competency of the workforce. And we have programs like the MFP, which we just celebrated the 50th anniversary and are looking to expand components of MFP. And then also our work with historically HBCUs and HSUs as well. Next slide. So now I'll do a quick update on some of our crisis related work. Next slide. As we know, an important part of the vision has been for people to be able to have certainly someone to talk with, someone to respond, a safe place to go for help. Ultimately, we're interested in continuing to build out the full continuum of care. The first year really was focusing on strengthening the lifeline, ensuring that that was staffed across the 200 call centers across the country, that there were people to be able to answer those calls, texts and chats that came in. We are so appreciative of just the broad collaboration that we've had through many of our national partners, but also our state partners and also the partners at the local level. There's been just such collaboration here to be able to get to this point where, 1 year in, we're seeing within the first year, and next slide, I'll just share some of the metrics. Within the first year, about 5 million contacts were made, which is about 2 million more than the previous year. And so how that breaks down is about, a significant increase in texts. So 1,135% increase in texts, and you'll see the increase in chats and calls as well. And what we're seeing also is the time to answer significantly decreased. So from about 2.5 minutes or a little over 2.5 minutes to about 41 seconds. And then the Veterans Crisis Line as well received about an additional 1 million calls, texts or chats that came in. And so what that lets us know again is that just so grateful for the collaboration across the country and for the call centers that are just doing such vital work answering these calls, texts, and chats that are coming in. Next slide. So one thing that we're, that we've been working on is just to continue to increase access through, for example, Spanish chat and text services were recently announced. We also have the subnetwork for LGBTQ+ callers, and so really focusing on just a number of subpopulations. We recently announced the ASL and video phone services for individuals that are deaf and hard of hearing. And then in state of Washington, they actually have a subnetwork, so people can dial 988 and press 4 to receive access to the Native Strong subnetwork of 988. And that's just, again, in the state of Washington. Next slide. So we're focused on, continuing to get the word out. I think it's been important to sort of let folks know sort of what 988, what it is, what it isn't, to really work to increase awareness. That's what we're working on now. In November, we've got a tribal event coming up in Oklahoma. We'll be doing a tribal summit. And some of the goal there is just to continue to raise awareness around 988. And, one thing I so appreciated as we've been traveling around, it's been wonderful to see just the billboards that are popping up and the murals. And we went to a reservation in New Mexico a number of months ago. And as we were driving to the reservation, it was certainly in a rural area. And so all of a sudden we see a billboard, and it was a 988 billboard. And then when we got to the reservation, there were those, similar to those like election yard signs. There were 988 yard signs all over the reservation as well. So it's been really nice to see the creative ways that communities are working to get the word out about 988. Next slide. So these are just some pictures from the 1 year anniversary, and then also the road show that's been happening. The 988 team has been traveling around the country again to let folks know about 988 and really celebrating with communities and working to raise awareness. We've had events at historically Black institutions. You'll see events within parks, a lot of artwork that's ultimately used as advertising to help get the word out. So murals, posters, there's a 988 bell that also was decorated and is just another great way to get the word out. And this was within Missouri that a lot of this work happened. Next slide. Another thing that we're really excited about is our partnership with NFL. So folks might have noticed if you're football fans, I think it was opening weekend or the weekend after, many of the teams had 988 cleats. So we were just thrilled about that. We are trying to have ideas about 988 on the jerseys. And so continue the conversations with NFL, because it's just a great way to continue to get the word out and to reach populations that we might not reach otherwise. And so just certainly part of the focus for the coming year. Go Cowboys, I see. My husband would say go Steelers, but it's we won't get into the football. I know it's a fierce time of year in terms of the football. I know, boo. That's funny. So again, a goal is just continuing to raise awareness. And so these are just some of the areas. I had a partnership with the Major League Baseball players, and there was a Instagram Live event that happened, continuing our work with the NFL. And then we're really going to start doing specific media buys to continue to get the word out as well. So we're excited about that now to be able to work specifically and get some messages out. Ultimately, some of the goal is we're continuing our work around with the Suicide Prevention Resource Center and also the Ad Council. And so another area of work is working to develop messaging that's specifically targeted at groups that may be underutilizing or may not be aware of 988. So at-risk groups and under-resourced communities as well. Next slide. I think we're nearing the end. So just a couple of other resources we wanted to share. Findsupport.gov, we did launch a number of months ago. It is available in Spanish as well. And again, that is a resource for individuals that maybe have questions about accessing behavioral health services and may not be ready to access treatment yet. And so there are wonderful vignettes, examples and information about ways to pay for treatment, different types of treatment that may be available, ways to cope with stress or different stressors. And again, this is available in both English and Spanish. So certainly take a look at this and help us get the word out about findsupport.gov. And I believe that was my last slide. So yes, all right, thank you. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Everett, who will provide some opening remarks as well, and then we will continue on. Dr. Everett?
Great. So thank you. And thank you, Assistant Secretary. We're so, happy with your leadership and continued focus on the breadth of focus on mental health services, but in particular, topic of today, those that are involved with serious mental illness and or children with serious emotional distress. So thank you. As this group knows or has learned, SAMHSA does its work in many ways, and that was really beautifully illustrated by the range of things that Dr. Duffin-Rittman covered with us. We do our work in this, particularly at the center level, predominantly through grants administration, but we also are involved in a number of other activities that help to reduce stigma, increase access, and increase the quality of services that individuals, particularly those living with serious mental illness, have the opportunity to engage with. So we also do convenings, we do products and reports. Those were really well illustrated in what Dr. Duffin-Rittman demonstrated. We do public speaking, which if you want to know one of the busiest people in town, you can certainly take a look at Miriam's travel and talking schedule. We all have been engaged in, accepting public speaking engagements or opportunities to help get the word out about what we do, but also even the greater experience of what mental illness is and reducing stigma. We have a number of technical assistance centers and work on, as she also demonstrated through the work with 988, communication strategies about mental health, pro mental health activities or messaging. So I wanted to illustrate a couple of those types of things that we've been doing at the center level, the Center for Mental Health Services. And also I'll go ahead and thank, I know at the end we'll be thanking the staff of the Center for Mental Health Services, which is where ISMIC resides. Want to go ahead and give a quick shout out to Belina Shaw and Joel Fuentes, who helped to sort of put together some of the scaffolding for this meeting today. All right, so we've been engaged in, and one of the types of convenings that we do that helps to sort of amplify solutions to national problems. And then the example here, or the use case here, being suicide and the rising rate of suicide nationally, but in particular among the subgroup of Black youth, has been to convene policy academies. And for those who may not be familiar, a policy academy is a grouping of states. States come together together with us. They bring teams of individuals who around a particular topic area. And the first one that we held this summer was on Black youth suicide. And so we solicited invitations to states that had higher rising rates of Black youth suicide, which is heretofore sort of unknown or not widely known that was a particular subgroup of individuals that we're very concerned about. So we convened 8 states that got together with their state suicide leadership, state mental health authorities, and other individuals that are involved at the state level in creating a workable plan that they take back with them. So we had them together in Baltimore this summer. Very exciting 2 or 3 day meeting, was covered, in fact, by local media. And the states have gone back, and we now are engaged in a year-long process, a follow-up with them to keep the community that was created in the context of the Policy Academy meeting itself together, and also keep ongoing with troubleshooting, implementation activities related to implementing the plans that they developed during the Policy Academy event. Another one of our activities here that we've engaged with is creation of a national strategy for suicide prevention. This is the first time this has been updated in about 10 years. And so our suicide branch has been working on that as well, and that will be formally released sometime in the spring. Next slide. Just have a couple of highlights here. A second policy academy we had was to do a drill down and focus on the concern about America's youth and what happens to youth who may or may not be diagnosed with or come out with features of a mental illness in that critical period of transitional age youth period. And so we know that kids and mental illnesses often can derail, or too often can derail, kids who otherwise would be engaged in employment or college or other things that youth of that age group are making decisions about. And we want to help individuals track into employment or other sorts of activities that would enable them to get on their life trajectory, that not be disabled or limit the disability caused by mental illnesses. And so we worked on convening a grouping of states, the states that are listed there, very excited group of members, teams from states, many of whom hadn't really talked to one another. The state mental health department, for instance, together with the voc rehabilitation offices. And so we gathered them together a little bit later in the summer, and each of these states have very active plans. If you're in one of these states, please feel free to contact the representatives, or we can get information to you about which individuals from your state attended those meetings. And so it was a really good, high energy meeting that we are hopeful will really help to support youth as they make that transition from school ending in 12th grade and so on into employment and or supported education through college or university, so that the impact of the mental illnesses are mitigated. Next slide. And then a third policy academy that we had this summer also gathered in a similar kind of way teams of individuals from either states or counties. And this was really designed to support the 988, the whole series of crisis services that go along with 988. And as was mentioned earlier, we know that the calls, the 988 calls, and having national access and availability of the 988 call system is a very important foundation. We also know that works, that can help to sort of resolve the crisis at hand for many individuals who call. Upwards of 90 or so or more percent of individuals either feel better or have some sense of resolution by the call alone, but some individuals need more help. And so there are, the way we like to frame it is a call, someone to respond, which would be in the form of mobile crisis teams, which have behavioral specialists as a component of it. And then the third arm would be a place to go that is an alternative to an emergency department. And we're not saying anything negative about emergency departments, but I think all of us know that too often emergency departments aren't the best place for individuals with active mental illnesses to receive treatment for a variety of different reasons. So we're trying to do whatever we can in the center to support the 988 in the development nationally of crisis services. Ultimately, we see this as developing on par with 911, and know that ambulance services and effective emergency rooms, emergency triage is an important part of that. So these counties, Tom Green County in Texas, Pickens County in South Carolina, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Walla Walla, Washington, the Neighborhood Center in New York, and Riley County, Kansas, were selected through a competitive process to come and sort of develop strategies for implementing 988 and related crisis services as someone to respond, place to go in their counties. The picture of the armed officer there is important. We, all of us, including officers that we work with, are interested in having more mental health response to mental health crises and less law enforcement response to mental health crises. And so effective development of crisis services across a county or local government or statewide often involves or needs to involve some cooperation with law enforcement so that individuals are sorted and go to the place that's going to help them the best with the crisis at hand. Next slide. This is my prompt to talk a little bit about one of our key programs, which is the CCBHCs, the Certified Community Behavioral Health Centers. Hopefully, all of you are aware of these, and if you're not, I could talk your ear off. I'm happy to meet separately to make sure we're all acquainted with what a CCBHC is. We have the picture there of President Robert F. Kennedy, who signed the Community Mental Health Center Act into law in really 60 years ago this month. Was one of the last acts that he signed into law as president before his tragic assassination. Part of the whole Community Mental Health Center Act was a piece or a component of the New Frontiers Initiative, and the New Frontiers Initiative was also associated with the successful moonshot and other activities that were post World War II. The modern era sort of activities, mid-century activities. But this one was particularly important to him because of his sister's involvement with the mental health system, and because he saw or wanted to transform heretofore its systems that had depended heavily on institutional care to community-based care. And so he envisioned, and his language in the speeches is pretty inspiring, to envision a whole new system for individuals so that they could be have their needs met, treatment, we call it now recovery support services. I don't think they use that language then, but could have support, ongoing support in an outpatient or community-based setting close to their homes rather than institutional care. We feel like this is brought up in the context of CCBHCs because we feel like the CCBHC model is the first real shot we've had at a national model, a national floor for individuals with a range of mental illnesses, particularly suited to serve those with SMI and children with SED. It's the first national shot we've had really since the 60 years ago, since the original vision of RFK. And so we're really proud to have this connected to that original vision. Too often, for those of us who work and live in the systems that are so variable, it depends way too much on where you live, what kind of services you can get. And that's not on par with general health care. If we break a limb, have a sickness, we have a certain expectation in America for services, no matter if we live in rural Texas, rural Wyoming, urban Manhattan, wherever we live, we have a certain expectation for care. It's way too variable in the field of mental health, particularly for those with the serious mental illness end of the spectrum. And thank you, Judge Leifman, for the correction, not RFK, JFK. Somehow I was thinking about it's JFK, who was the president. All right, so let's go on. So that's very important, and we think this is a really privilege that we have to support the development and the building out of the CCBHC model. Next slide. So now I have the privilege of turning over to our support for this. Dr. Shaw has been a leader of the ISMIC process for about the last year and has really done well with regards to supporting the meetings, the subcommittees that are part of this, the stewards that we have across each of the different focus areas, and has been joined recently by Joel Fuentes, who has been an amazing support. And so, Belina, at this point, I'll turn over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Next slide, please, Joel. I am Belina Shaw, joined as well by Joel Fuentes, and we are very excited to give you some general ISMIC updates, just more or less some housekeeping here. Next slide. So as far as updates, first of all, I want to acknowledge Joel, who has been working tirelessly behind the scenes, even during this meeting, but also with the multiple staff, requests of data and just the degree of coordination for this work it's a lot of work, and I'm so appreciative to have him as my right hand doing this work. So I just wanted to give Joel a chance to say hi and tell us a little bit about himself as well.
Sure. Thank you, Belina, for that introduction. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Joel. I'm with the Office of Policy, Coordination, and Innovation, a new office here at CMHS within SAMHSA. And I have a background in bioethics and health equity, formerly at HRSA. So I'm excited to continue providing support to all those involved with the ISMIC and really help to elevate some of this work. Thank you.
Thank you. And so we will be seeing Joel in the working groups. So we'll actually have him embedded within our working groups with the goal of making sure that the working groups are integrated. Some of the desired communications that we would like to continue that had started in the very beginning, with the very beginning of the ISMIC, such as a newsletter, and we'll talk more about that. And he'll be taking the lift with that, as well as just making sure that all the nuts and bolts of this are continuing to go along. So the next update is that Tara Andrews will replace Michelle Cornett as the steward for the Access and Engagement Working Group. Michelle Cornett moved on to the 988 and Behavioral Health Coordinating Office, and we still work closely with her on many activities. But with that shift, she is no longer as formally a steward. So we're excited to have Tara, and there's this adage of see one, do one, teach one. Well, Tara has not even had the chance to see one, but will be presenting today on behalf of her working group because her co-steward David Berry has been deployed. So we're just so thankful for Tara for jumping in really head first in this work as a steward. So the next piece is recruitment. So, as far as the federal, as far as the working group members, we have 5, and I think this is a great meeting, this October meeting where there'll be highlights of the different working groups and really what they're focusing on. But for all of the federal working group members, this is an opportunity to really think about how your staff could also support the working groups. As time goes on, there's turnover of staff, or staff, move on or take on a different role. And so we just want to make sure that our federal working group members are within, or the federal, that we have a robust number of other federal partners in our working groups. This is for our principals from the federal other members of the ISMIC to really just keep your thinking hat on throughout this meeting for who else from your agency that you would like to join us. And then the next piece that I just want to think about is membership engagement. So monthly, the stewards have a meeting that we convene and talk about the ISMIC, both from a content and process perspective, but we do not do that specifically with the non-stewards, which would be and so the stewards obviously can bring that back to their members of their working groups, but just wanted to open up the floor a little bit and ask whether or not the federal and non-federal members, you guys have any ideas or would like to know a little bit more about what's going on in between the meetings. Obviously, these 6-month meetings, you get major updates, and the stewards have the opportunity to bring back updates at the working group meetings. But would you want to know a little bit more in between? Yes, by all means. I see Jennifer Higgins. Okay. And if you have any ideas about what would be most helpful, whether or not that's a written communication or a meeting communication, but we could think about some ways to summarize what's going on between the working groups. Anyone else have any other input? You can feel free to unmute yourself or put something in the chat. Yes, Anita.
I was to say at the very beginning of ISMIC, we did have a newsletter that went out, a really short, like a 1-pager newsletter. As an example of a way that we intended to communicate out. I think it went out about every 6 weeks. So that's another idea. I think what you're trying to do, Dr. Shaw, is solicit broad. Would an email that has a little bit of information in it be good, or would a meeting? The meetings are, a little bit complex to put together because of public notice and things like that. But
But about an ad hoc expert meeting. Jennifer, would you like to?
Sure. So I had actually suggested this last year, so that there's ad hoc sort of expertise meetings, whether that's federal or non-federal members or a combination, something to be working, continuing the dialogue between the meetings, between the official ISMIC meetings would be great. And I suggested ad hoc, meaning we'd pull in people that had various expertise on topics as they came and went, because sometimes there is episodic focus on particular issues, and content experts would be useful, I think.
Okay, and we could actually do that as part of, for example, part of one of the working groups. If there's that working group, the expertise is anchored within one of the working groups, I think that would be an awesome opportunity. And I think one of the beauty and the challenge of the ISMIC is that the topics are so broad that that it may be hard with a bunch of busy people to make sure that everyone is engaged throughout the extent of all of the work. But if it's back to anchored to the topics that are most relevant to the other agencies, then and thinking about ways to do that, I think that would be important. And we can use the working group structure to do that.
May I just add one more thing? I'm also wondering, I know that the CCBHC and other types of groups have listservs. I wondered if maybe we could have, we don't want to be bombarded with information and messages, but maybe a listserv opportunity would be good for us to chime in on topics between meetings.
I like that. And I think that we will be focusing on and talking a little bit more about a newsletter. And actually that newsletter, I think, could be there could be a formal, like we were thinking, quarterly newsletter, and then maybe some other opportunity for dialogue in between in a digital communication format. So that's another great way to think about that. Anything else? Anyone else? Okay. Well, thank you so much. The next is our report to Congress. So we are actively working on a report to Congress. We have secured some contractual support to do this work. I want to thank all of the agencies for responding to the data calls or the requests through the stewards and your working group members to really identify content for the report. As you think through this meeting today, for all of the principals that are here, if there's any of the work that's being done within your agency that's relevant or is highly utilized by individuals with serious mental illness and serious emotional disturbance, and you haven't passed that on already to your stewards, or just wanted to make sure that it's something you would love to see in the report to Congress, then feel free to reach out to us so that we can make sure that that the work of your agencies are being highlighted. Because SAMHSA is the behavioral health agency and our focus is on mental health, that we a lot of the work that we're thinking about highlighting is within SAMHSA, but we do know that that the nature of the ISMIC is that it really has this cross-sector public-private strength. So just as you're thinking through, just feel free to shoot us a line. And even if it's just, I want to focus on X, we can give you the information. We can go back and ask for more information for whatever will be required to add to that report. So there's the highlights. And then thank you all for also, as part of the report, and we'll be providing a comprehensive list of all programs that are that are relevant to the ISMIC, and then we'll also be asking about any evaluations that of said programs that have been done. And we use the term evaluation somewhat loosely because we know that having a formalized evaluation, an independent evaluation can be a costly process that we may not all have the funding to do in our agencies, but at least making sure that there are reports or other data or process outcomes or outcomes measures that we like to highlight in the work. The next is our non-federal ISMIC membership update. So we're in the queue of the processing. Pam knows all the details thereof, but processing a couple of new members. I don't want to, of non-federal members, I don't want to reveal the information until it's finally public. But the foci of those individuals are minoritized youth, youth in general broadly, specializations from people with lived experience to people who psychologists, psychiatry. So all of we're just really excited about the membership, and also that we're looking forward to joining the people that we're looking forward to joining our membership. And that would include some tribal representation as well. So just keep your eyes out and tune for our newest members, but we're very excited to have new folks joining as well. So now I'll turn it over to Joel to introduce actually our newest non-federal ISMIC member.
Right. And Ansu, I'll turn it over to you in a bit for you to provide a little bit of introduction about yourself. But for those of you who are not familiar yet with Dr. Sue Smith, Dr. Sue Smith received her doctorate in education in 2000 and is a parent professional with over 33 years of experience in the field of services provided in systems of care, family and youth involvement, policies, and practices. She has managed a system of care, CHAMPS, in Atlanta, Georgia, therapeutic foster and respite services, a peer-to-peer transition program for youth with mental illness and addictive diseases and receiving center, family resource center for all of the youth removed from their homes by Georgia's Department of Family and Youth Services in Fulton County. She is well known and respected in Georgia and at the national level for her expertise in children's services, advocacy, education, and systems of care, and she is the Chief Executive Officer for the Georgia Parent Support Network. Sue, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you. It's certainly an honor to be here. And I was enjoying all of the information, updates, and things that are coming that you've been discussing today. After watching everything progress for so many years, I think the best thing is to be able to see where we've come from, and you give me such hope and for the future, and just feel honored to be here, say it once again. But I look forward to working with you all and hearing from you all and learning from you all. So that's from down south, right? So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sue Smith. And if you would like to read more about other initiatives that Dr. Sue Smith is involved in, please feel free to visit our ISMIC sub-website on our SAMHSA website for a full bio and see where many of you guys may overlap. So now to the exciting part of our new comms strategy, which some of you may have already been alluded to and getting excited about. We wanted to introduce a new ISMIC quarterly newsletter that will be going out shortly after this full ISMIC meeting. And so really based on feedback we've received from federal and non-federal members alike, as well as the public, we've decided that a quarterly ISMIC newsletter we'll be going out to our membership, including any announcements, any updates about new membership, quarterly working group updates, some summaries of ISMIC related activities. And we know that a lot of the members here involved, both internally to SAMHSA, both our federal partners and others, are releasing a lot of awesome content, such as reports, videos, a lunch and learn that we'll learn about in a bit from the Department of, from HUD and SAMHSA. And so, considering that many of our members have expertise that cross a variety of topic areas, this content will really serve to keep the members abreast of all the activities happening within the working groups and subcommittees, and really serve as a way to update about all the activities that are going on. And so we're excited to announce this, and so stay tuned. And so now, we have a question, yes.
Hi, thanks. I think it's Steve Leifman. Wonderful that you're doing this newsletter. I just was wondering if it would have like links that you could attach. For instance, the Conference of Chief Justices and the Conference of State Court Administrators puts out a monthly newsletter, and the Judges Psychiatrist Leadership Initiative does as well. And it might be nice if you could link some of those other really important pieces and work that's being done, so we can kind of all be on the same page.
Certainly, we can certainly link to those resources if you share them with us. Thank you.
I'll be happy to do it. I'll send them to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other comments and concerns about ideas for the quarterly newsletter? What would folks like to see? Would they, any comments people might have? Seeing none, we would like to move on to another exciting portion of this meeting, which is the group photos. So for those of you who are joining us online, if you would like to turn on your camera, we're going to pause for a moment to really commemorate this moment. And if Belina, if you could also help me, I'm going to get a picture on my end, but if multiple folks can take a screenshot so that we can kind of have multiple angles, that would be great. So I'll give you guys a few seconds. All right. All right, everybody smile on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Great, perfect. Thank you, guys. All righty, and now I will turn it over to Dr. Belina Shaw, who will be discussing a few branding and website updates.
Thank you, Joel. So we are excited here in the ISMIC Central, if you call it, for ISMIC 2.0, I think, as Anita called it at the last meeting. And one of the important things that we would like to do is highlight and elevate the work of the ISMIC. I think there's a lot of work that is being done that is not necessarily, it's often tied to the ISMIC, but is not clearly known that it's tied to the ISMIC. It's birthed or born out of ISMIC members or ideas from the working groups, or really has some influence from the membership of the members, et cetera. And so we really wanted to take this time, especially with this next report to Congress, to think about a way to make it known that that the ISMIC is alive, well, doing a lot of really important things. So this is our proposed, and we, we're opening this up to the membership here to give feedback, but this is our proposed new logo, if you will. I'm sure that there's some other processes to get this as official, but the important thing to know about this logo is that it's not just that we liked the Olympics, but that each color is actually symbolic of the 5 working groups. There are 5 rings, and each color it actually would therefore symbolize the working group. And then actually also in this, we hope to create small icons that correspond to the color and some type of illustrated, a little picture to, we have an illustrator that could help us with this to really indicate what each working group is doing. So for example, I think we've already mentioned the HUD and the SAMHSA World Mental Health Day event. And I know that Corey Minor-Smith will be talking a little bit more about that in the future, but and a little later in the meeting. But in the future, we could just have this as somewhere on some slides or somewhere in the advertisements of the work that say that this is happening. We haven't fully designated a color for each working group. If my only thought is that the finance working group should possibly be green, but otherwise we don't have, there isn't a clearly defined color, and we don't have clearly defined pictures for the icons. But just wanted to throw this out there to the group and see if they're what the feedback is about this proposed logo. Or does it make you think too much of the Olympics? Looks good, I think. Sounds good. All right. Well, I'm going to say that no news is good news. But I do think, I think that the beauty of it is also very simple, but simple and symbolic. And also the other key idea of this is the interconnectedness of the links. And that was one thing that we felt was really important, is to make sure that the links were overlapping and that they're, in that centerpiece there, there's no distinction, of the beginning of or the end for the rings, or really how they're connected. And that's how we want the ISMIC to function. So we will be using this thematically on the website, as well as the report. And going forward, we'll be using this thematically in other areas as well. All right, so I am going to introduce us to a possible. Sorry, Mina, do you want to say what you're saying?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, if you can go back one slide, please, to the nice the circles. Yeah. So I think it's a great concept. I'm wondering if it's possible to have, I know it's maybe tough visually, but a central clearing where we put the focus on patients with SMI and SCD. Because I think, trying to stay patient-centered and remind everybody that these 5 rings are working towards a central goal might be visually it might, drive home the message. Over.
Where are you thinking about that? I'm a visual person and I'm not visualizing it right at this moment.
I think if there were 2 circles, it's easy, or even 3 circles, it's easier to find a common center. But I think with 5 circles, you might have to get one of these smart image people involved.
Okay.
Trying to find a common center for these 5 groups.
I see. And if there's something that's there's something like, as opposed to being white in the center, if there's maybe some type of central color or something like that.
Or some way to symbolize that where all the 5 groups are working for patients.
That it's a patient.
SMIs and SCD.
Okay. We will see, we can discuss with our designer that any other feedback. That's a good point to think about, that we're not just sort of, going in circles. Yes, I appreciate the symbolism of the 5 and interconnects, but I find it a little overwhelming, like a maze. Okay.
And actually, I have a comment. So Mina, as you were talking, a thought I had is that center, if we can find a centermost area, we'll probably need to make it a little bit bigger, but maybe we put ISMIC in the center and then it would be purple for the recovery color.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Right? That would be, I think it might be like that little space there above that little yellow area, but somewhere in there, I think we might have to make it a little bit bigger. So the designer could probably do that. But if we could get ISMIC in there, that could work. And then purple for recovery, because that's ultimately what we're all sort of working towards.
Yes, and we haven't. They've already started to play with the ways to put the word ISMIC in or around, and we hadn't quite loved them yet. And we felt that it was very important to make it some color that's not one of the other 5 rings. So purple. I think the symbolism of purple could be impactful too. We can definitely ask for some mock-ups for some additional ideas. It is a little busy.
Yeah, I think just having the 5 circles alone without a central focus, it's not, it's hard to sort of have context. So having a central clearing with ISMIC or with, family, or something to indicate that we're really focused, it's patient-centered, recovery focused, and, the name ISMIC. So I think that would be super.
Yeah, okay. I like it. Thank you for that feedback. This is good feedback. All right, thank you. So this is just you can mull this over as we look at as the possible ring there. But I want to introduce us to the next part of our agenda, which will be the 2-part working group presentations. So the first will be a brief topical presentation, and that is either from a member of the working group or also an expert who has provided some ideas or some other expertise to really provide input to the working group, or that they've wanted to model some of their work from. So we'll have these brief group topical presentations. And then there will be a group report, discussion, and vote. So we are have a lot in this agenda, as Dr. Delphine-Rittman said. So in that last piece of that group discussion, votes, etc., that I want to talk about all of what these icons mean. You'll see these icons on the next slides. So each slide will have an introduction to the working group, a focus and priority recommendation. We'll go through some triumphs and trials and discussion and voting. We use this template at the last meeting, but this is what the templates, you'll see these little icons at the beginning, and it'll help us stay focused and grounded on what we are presenting. And so then here, we will have the discussion and approval of the working group report. And this will be the final slide that we'll see. And then they'll have suggestions to the working group, whether regarding the highlighted trial. We will then vote, or the members will vote. And if there are any additions, revisions, or retirement of any recommendations, that would happen during this period. And then, but for all of the groups, there would be an approval of the working group's report to the ISMIC as a whole body. So there's a lot of information between the mini presentation and the working group report that will be happening here today. We ask that people stay on time, about 30 or so minutes between the discussion and the presentations. So we just remind everyone to stay on time, but we have a lot to get through. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Delphine-Rittman.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Shaw, and thank you, Joel, as well, for your presentation and updates. We do have a packed agenda, so we will just dive right in. I'll just start by introducing our first working group presentation. We have with us Dr. Lisa Callahan from the SAMHSA Gain Center, and she will be presenting for Working Group 4, Criminal Justice, the Criminal Justice Working Group. So Dr. Callahan, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Delphine-Rittman, for the introduction. And I want to thank everyone for inviting me today to talk about the work that SAMHSA has been doing with the Gain Center on the topic of competency to stand trial and competency restoration. I'm going to do a brief, if you next slide, please. This is a brief overview of my presentation. I'm going to try to squeeze a lot into the time that we have. More than happy to talk with people at another time on any of these initiatives or any of the other work that we're doing or any of our deliverables. But I want to make sure that I get through all of the work that we're doing, because it's quite a body of work that SAMHSA has been supporting the Gain Center in doing over the last really 5 or 6 years. So next slide, please. So just to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing, using the same language, just a couple of introduction slides, if you will. And if this is repetitive for you, I apologize. There really are there are three main United States Supreme Court cases that are the guidelines around the issue of competence to stand trial and competence restoration. While it's always been part of Anglo-Saxon law, that is, that people need to know why they're going to trial, it really wasn't brought before the U.S. Supreme Court until 1960, and that case is Dusky versus the United States. And Dusky doesn't really provide very good guidelines as to what is meant by understanding something and having a rational decision capacity, but nonetheless, that's what they left us with in 1960. And since then, states have been deciding what that means. The second major case is Jackson versus Indiana, which was in 1972. And really the main purpose, the main message from Jackson is that people who have been found incompetent to stand trial, there has to be an end date for their restoration. And what they found in Jackson is that someone cannot be held in restoration, in other words, having their case in abeyance until for any longer than what the maximum sentence for their underlying charges. So for someone charged with a serious offense, that can be a very long time. But for someone charged with a relatively minor offense, such as a misdemeanor, that would be a very short period of time. And also Jackson requires that the defendant be found restorable at some point. The third case is Sell versus the United States, a more recent case. And this sets conditions for forced medications to restore competency. And for any of you who work in the field or are familiar with this, this is, of course, one of the hot button issues right now in the area of competency restoration. Next slide, please. And I think it's important to sort of lay the groundwork with why this is an issue right now, because if you were to look at just the numbers of people who are in the competency system across the country compared to other parts of the behavioral health system, it's not that many, but it's a really significant population, and one that is really very disadvantaged when it comes to many of their behavioral health challenges. So it's an important population, and it's one that increasingly is getting a lot of attention across the country. Competence is the system is on overload, and that's evidenced by the wait list that states have, that the many court cases that have either been decided or are pending on this issue. And one of the issues that gives rise really to this overload is that the issue of competence can be raised in most states at any point in time and by any party. So typically it's the judge or the prosecutor or the public defender who raises the issue of whether someone is competent to proceed or competent to stand trial. But in many states, any number of people can raise the issue. And there's a very low threshold for asking for a competence evaluation. This could be someone is acting in a particular way that gives rise to whether they understand. It can be a familiarity with someone to know that they have had issues with competence in the past. And then there also are sometimes some perhaps not so clinically driven reasons why this question might get asked. A judge's order is required for a competence evaluation. So that is a request that's made to the judge who's presiding over a particular case, and he, she, or they make a decision whether or not a competence evaluation is ordered. Judges rarely decline an order, just as an aside. There are many reasons for that, but if a public defender were to raise a question about competence, the judge would more than likely go along with that and order it. One of the concerns that's been raised in the work that we've been doing is in some states and in some communities, attorneys confuse competence to stand trial with insanity. They're two different issues altogether. Competence to stand trial has to do with in the current state, in the way that someone is presently, can they understand what's going on in their case and can they assist with their attorney? Insanity has to do with at the time the offense occurred. They're different. Sometimes it's the same defendant who has both issues, but for purposes of what I'm talking about today, this is it has to do with how the person is in the present and whether or not they can assist their attorney. In some cases, we've been told that competence to stand trial is a trial strategy, that sometimes it's a way to manage cases when someone has a very full caseload. It can also, if it's a particularly notorious crime, for example, that's occurred in a community, it can provide some time for the parties to cool off a little bit between the offense and the trial, is another tactic that for using the competency system. It's also, and this is, I think, where really the difficulty in making significant changes falls, is that it's a real diffusion of responsibility. Cases arise from the local communities, from the counties in every state, but the state is, in almost every state, the state is completely responsible for competence restoration. So you have two different levels of government and jurisdiction making decisions, and having a really significant impact on the other. And we've found that in most states, there's not a lot of communication between the local people and the state. There's also, we hear very frequently that there's a belief that by asking for a competence evaluation as a way to get someone into treatment. That's not the way in which the behavioral health system is supposed to work. But some people are under the belief that that's a way to get people treatment. And unfortunately, it's also a situation where people who are in the competence system are in it often for a very long period of time. And we often forget about them. So out of sight, out of mind. These are the main concepts that are at the heart of the competence system. Most of you are probably familiar with them. Acronyms abound in this area, as we know. I'm going to use competence to stand trial, and the abbreviation being CST. What's really important to keep in mind, really across all of these concepts, is that these are legal questions. They're not clinical questions. These are legal questions that a judge makes. And the understanding is that they will be making these with evaluation or clinical evaluation and recommendations, but the decision is ultimately up to the judge whether or not someone is incompetent to stand trial, whether there's an evaluation, whether they've been restored, and whether they're ready to go back to trial. Next slide, please. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that many of you who are on this today are familiar with the sequential intercept model. The reason I want to show you this is because in order for communities to make significant changes that affect their competence system, they really need to look at the entire criminal justice system, because there are different points, inflection points or intercept points, if you will, where decisions can be made, where people can be diverted out of the criminal justice system and out of the competence system altogether. Next slide, please. Dr. Deb Peinels, who many of you know and are colleagues with, she and I developed this focus on intercepts 2 and 3 as a way to really begin to dig down and see where communities could begin and states could begin to make some changes in their competence system. Each of these arrows represents an opportunity back to diversion, meaning that there are decisions being made at each of these points in intercept 2 and 3, where a decision could be made, a recommendation could be made, for example, from a clinician to a judge, that someone be, rather than going into inpatient restoration, instead be ordered to outpatient restoration if they were found incompetent to stand trial. Next slide, please. So now I want to focus on the work that the Gaines Center has been doing with SAMHSA. The Gaines Center has been a TA center for SAMHSA since 1995. And this work that we've been doing with SAMHSA began in this generation, if you will, in 2018, and is continuing till today. Next slide, please. Lots of words on this slide, but what I want to focus on here is we were contracted in 2018, and then were tasked with revising or updating our national scan in 2023. And what we were asked to do in 2018 was to look at the data nationally to see what if any best practices there are in the area of competence to stand trial, whether that's restoration or evaluation, to find out if there were any recommendations that could be made to improve the services across the country. What we came away with are these basic findings, and I think the one at the top it's always going to rise to the top until there is some very good coordination of data sharing across the local and the state level and across agencies. Because one of the findings we found in 2018 and also again in 2023 is that there really is a lack of data sharing across the systems. And so if you think about the SIM, most states don't know how many people or which people are at any one of those points across the SIM, across the competence process. Most states cannot tell us how many people are on their wait list, cannot tell us how many people are waiting for an evaluation, how many people had an evaluation last year, how many people are waiting for restoration services, how many people were restored, et cetera. So in addition to being sort of a guideline of where decisions are made, that 2-3 SIM can also give guidance to communities of where they can start to collect data and identify where people might be stuck in the system and where some changes could be made. A couple of highlights in terms of what we found in 2023 that really were a little bit new or maybe rose to the a more critical level is that we found that while more communities are implementing outpatient restoration services, that means an alternative to the inpatient hospital, there's really an underutilization of those services. We also found an increase in jail-based competence restoration sites. This isn't without controversy, but nonetheless, many states are implementing jail-based restoration programs. We also were really pleased that some of our federal other partners that we work with across the country, such as the National Center for State Courts, the National Judicial Task Force issued recommendations this year on what courts can do to improve the competence system. Workforce shortages persist. That's no news to anyone here. It's really hit the forensic system quite hard. And this is something that COVID just exacerbated. Also, we need to make sure that we pay attention to the Americans with Disabilities Act and how that is influenced. It should influence the work in this area and the need for cross-system collaboration. So what I'd like to here kind of put a plug in is that as the result of the 2018 work and then as our 2023 update, we have just gotten approval from SAMHSA to publish the output from all of this work from the national scan. And that includes all of the research review and also an analysis of every state's statute that deals with the issue of competence. So that should be on the SAMHSA store. I'm going to hope by the 1st of November, but it has gone through all the approvals. It's just being 508, made 508 compliant at this point. Next slide, please. So after we did the national scan, we were tasked with creating a learning collaborative on competence to stand trial and competence restoration. That learning collaborative continued for 4 years, and I'm going to give you a few highlights from the learning collaborative. We sent out a solicitation nationally requesting applications from states to apply for the learning collaborative to focus on competence restoration and competence to stand trial. We asked them to identify what the issues were that they wanted to address. In the first column in 2019, you'll see the 8 states that were in the District of Columbia who were involved in the learning collaborative. Some of those jurisdictions continued across the next 3 years. Some, for any number of reasons, withdrew from the learning collaborative after the first year. So we were really pleased that we had a number of states, including the District of Columbia, that continued with us for 4 years. And that gave us some really great insight into what it takes to make changes in this space to improve the services for people who are in the competence system. Next slide, please. These were the accomplishments from the first year. Again, I'm not going to read all of these, but I think a couple I want to highlight and really that have fed some of the work that we're doing subsequent is the state of Nebraska passed legislation to allow outpatient restoration or community-based restoration. Prior to their activity in the learning collaborative, they had a goal of changing legislation, but didn't really have the mechanism or the tools. And so we worked with them to work with their state legislators to develop outpatient restoration legislation. Prior to that, it was expressly prohibited in Nebraska state law to allow for outpatient restoration. A number of states developed misdemeanor diversion programs. One state launched a pre-trial felony diversion program, which, as you can imagine, is a very heavy lift because people feel differently about felonies than they do about misdemeanors. A lot of documents and guidance were developed for courts in particular, with a focus on working across the systems to educate all the stakeholders about what's involved in the competence system. Next slide, please. In 2020, we all know why we switched to all virtual. Previously, it was both virtual and in person. And I just want to give you this is really a menu of what we did during the course of a learning collaborative. These were all done virtually, kind of last minute, but we had 34 TA events that were led by national experts, some of whom are on this call. I recognize some faces and names. We had 32-hour-long topical workshops that were led by national experts. I mean, we had, we anticipated a handful of people would attend from the 8 states. In some of these, we had hundreds of people from the states that attended, which was really a great bonus. More people could attend when it was virtual. And then we had 6 virtual strategic planning events for the states that were participating. Next slide, please. In 2020, these are some of our accomplishments. The list is a little bit shorter, but that doesn't mean they're less significant than the first year. We really worked on, what really became clear in the second year of the Learning Collaborative is that a lot of the work that the states initially thought they would be able to accomplish, really we're going to take a lot more time and a lot more partners at the table. This is, as I mentioned, a real local state network. It's really important for local governments, judges, sheriffs, and others to collaborate with the state partners so that they can have the best services as quickly as possible in the right location for people who need competent services. Next slide, please. In 2021, we also had a number of accomplishments from the states. What evolved over the course of these learning collaboratives is a number of the states started to really focus and dig in on the kind of data that they needed to collect in order to track and see where the pressure points are in their competence system. And that's something which continues to this day. Some have developed dashboards, for example. Others have identified common tools that they're going to use, say for risk assessment, for evaluation, screening tools, et cetera. So that was really a longer term process in order to do that. Something else that we did some TA around was staff burnout among the forensic providers. We were told and certainly believed that a number of the states were having a high turnover with some of their forensic providers. It's a tough job anyway, but COVID just exacerbated that, and that the impact of COVID on the forensic wait lists meant that there were more people in local jails who were waiting for forensic hospital beds. So that was causing some burnout among the forensic providers in the community. Next slide, please. So the last year of our learning collaborative, these were the accomplishments of the communities. There was one event in particular that we facilitated was a statewide summit on competence to stand trial. We did a 2-day summit with 2 states, involved both days, looking at how to communicate with judges about risk and how to communicate with judges about the competence process and what happens when someone's attorney, for example, raises the question of competence to stand trial, so that there was a full understanding of the sort of the trajectory, if you will, of the defendant's life when they are found incompetent to stand trial. A lot of really great TA was done during this 2022 year as well. Next slide, please. So the major themes that we've pulled away, obviously could come up with 20, but I thought I should keep it short, is that the collaboration among the local, state, and federal stakeholders is absolutely necessary. This is not an issue that can be addressed by any one of these entities. It really requires a dedicated and intentional collaboration. What we found is over time, as the states were engaged for more than 1 year, that their support and information sharing across the sites really increased dramatically. A lot of alliances were formed, a network, if you will, of the team leads and others were formed as a result of the Learning Collaborative. We found that the teams really matured in their strategies and their motivation in accomplishing their goals. They recognized it was not a sprint, but a marathon. And consequently, they were able to accomplish many of their goals, some of which I think year one they would have thought were not really reachable. And I think this is a major takeaway is this is really hard work. This is a really hard system to penetrate, and to have vision and patience is really important to be able to improve. But it's doable. It requires hard work from a lot of people, but it is doable, as our learning collaboratives have shown. Next slide, please. So in April of this year, we had a policy academy in Rockville. Next slide, please. And we invited 4 states that have been involved in the Learning Collaborative and 1 state that had not been in the Learning Collaborative, but we knew was doing a lot of work in their on their own through a statewide task force specifically on this issue. So the objective of the Policy Academy was to connect these state and local leaders. Every team had to have both state and local representatives on their team that came to the Policy Academy. They were to identify strategies for changing policy or court rules. They were also was to advance the planning and implementation of the goals in the states, and then to develop guidelines for best practices on competence to stand trial and competence restoration. Next slide, please. The 5 jurisdictions that took place in the Learning Collaborative were Alabama, District of Columbia, New Mexico, North Carolina, and Texas. New Mexico was the 1 state I mentioned who had been doing a lot of work on their own. We were so honored that Dr. Delphin Rittman and Dr. Everett did the opening keynote remarks to kick off our Policy Academy. Everyone was really pleased. It underscored for everyone there how important the work was that they had been doing when the Assistant Secretary and the Center Director came to the Policy Academy. They had about 8 hours across the 2 days to do guided strategic planning. We had facilitators who were not only seasoned facilitators, but also very, very conversant in the topics around competence to stand trial. So that was the agenda for the 2 days. Next slide, please. These were the team priorities that I'm not identifying them by the team, but there continues to be this focus on needing to improve data and increasing need or continued need of educating stakeholders on how the system really works, that it's not an alternative to behavioral health treatment. And moving then to talking about some kind of legislative changes that they would make. One of the things that we learned at the Policy Academy is in practice, a lot of the states are not actually, their practices around competence to stand trial are not consistent with their state law. So what emerged from that was a need in many of the states to consider changing their laws to adhere to what their practices are that have evolved over time. Just for example, in 1 state, the state statute allows for $50 for a competence evaluation, whereas they actually pay $250. That's the standard practice. But the state statutes had not kept up with that. So that was one of the priorities, was to shore up what they're doing and what the state law is. Next slide, please. We provided technical assistance, intensive TA to each of the sites based upon what their needs were as the result of the Policy Academy. And so much of this is ongoing. We have funding in our contract this year in an optional task to continue to provide virtual technical assistance to these 5 states. And we are doing that as we speak. So we're in the process of doing this additional TA to follow up the full year after the Policy Academy. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, model legislation or legislative changes emerged as something that would be a next step for the states that have been doing this work for so long. And these are some areas that we've identified at the evaluation stage and the restoration stage that might be topics for consideration for states to make changes or to examine, if you will, their legislation. So while we're certainly not advocating any changes or any particular content, just providing the technical assistance and the expertise to the states in the areas where they need to make some changes in their legislation. Next slide, please. So one of the guidance that we're starting with around model legislation is making sure that all of the legislation that is being proposed or discussed is consistent with those major cases that I mentioned at the outset of this presentation. It's really necessary that the states make sure that they're in compliance with Jackson, they're in compliance with SEL, they're in compliance with Olmstead, and also in compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. I think when states start to do a closer look at their practices and some of their laws, they'll find there's some areas here that they need to tweak so that they stay consistent with case law and federal law. So I want to thank you for listening and having an interest in this topic. It's one that is we believe is really important, and there's still a lot of work to be done. Happy to answer questions now, or if you want to reach out to me at another time, I'm more than happy to talk about the work that we're doing. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions? I think we might have time for a question or two. Or are we doing questions at the end, team?
We can do a couple of questions.
Yeah, it looks like we have some time. Thank you. Any questions for Lisa and the games team? They're just doing such important work. Judge Leithman?
Thank you. And Lisa, thanks so much. That was really informative and helpful. This has really become one of the main issues for the courts right now, because we see it really, unfortunately, as a big waste of money and very, very poor outcomes. I would just like to see more emphasis on the diversion side. And, you don't have to order competency evaluations if you're not going to adjudicate the individual. And so what we've been stressing more is that the courts look for diversion systems when people do get picked up, and don't necessarily order psychological evaluations up front, but instead do an assessment to see what their mental health needs are, and then make sure they are getting access to treatment, and then maybe using mental health courts or other diversion systems in the court system to make sure they maintain their services and get better access. And we're very pleased with what SAMHSA is doing with the certified community behavioral health clinics and the relationships that are being developed with them in the courts to make sure that we have something to divert to what. But it's a much better access. And I think for most judges and even some of the court, yes, there are some strategic issues that go on with competency, but the bigger issue and the bigger misuse is that most judges don't feel they have alternatives for treatment. So they use the competency system as a treatment system, which it is not, and does not provide treatment per se for this population. And there's a lot of education that needs to go on with the judges, and we are working on that now. And so I think, this is that we would love to talk to SAMHSA more about what we're doing so that we can team up on this. We're actually trying to retrain all 33,000 judges in mental health right now, period. And this is a big component of that retraining.
I will put an exclamation point on the point, Judge Leichman, that diversion should be the first consideration. But there needs to be something to divert someone to.
Absolutely. But sometimes the courts just don't know they don't even know that there's something in the community. So part of it is even developing, we put a form out to the judges, it's a stakeholder list to find out what's in your community, because, they just don't know even how to get that information, and we're teaching them how to do that. But yeah, that would be really helpful, Lisa. Thank you.
Yeah. And Judge, thank you for your comments. I mean, we're happy to have additional conversations. Definitely, I think we're on the same page there. The diversion piece is so important that people get connected, to needed services and supports early. So
yeah, and particularly before they even get arrested. I mean, we don't want them in our system. And, if you look at our data, we've reduced the number of arrests in Miami from 118,000 a year to 53,000. And most of it's just by retraining police and getting them to think about diversion first, and having collaborative agreements between our community mental health system and law enforcement. And it's really paid off.
Fantastic. Thank you. All right. So, and any other questions? Otherwise, we'll continue on. All right. Well, again, thank you so much, Lisa. And we just so appreciate the partnership and just the amazing work that you're doing with the Gain Center. And it was a wonderful policy academy as well. So thank you for your partnership on that as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we are going to have a report out from Working Group 4. And so we'll hear from Karen Gentile and Maya Banks. And so I'll turn it over to Karen and Maya.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Delphin Rittman. And thank you, Dr. Callahan, for just a really informative presentation. And thank you, Judge Leichman, for your comments. And we look forward to having some additional discussions. I'm going to go ahead and just get started with Working Group number 4, Criminal and Juvenile Justice Working Group Report. So again, I'm Maya Banks in the Division of Community Behavioral Health, formerly the Division of Service and Systems Improvement here with Karen Gentile, Director of the Office of Policy Coordination and Innovation, and we are the SAMHSA co-stewards of work group number 4. And we want to begin by just recognizing and appreciating all of our wonderful work group members, starting with our federal members. We want to appreciate Maria Fryer and Muriel Lifshitz from the Bureau of Justice Assistance, or BJA, Sarah Russo, Department of Justice, DOJ, Dia Boutwell, Bureau of Prisons, Jamira Howard, Office of Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation, or ASPE, Nancy Kirshner, Kirsten Jensen, and Michael Tankersley with the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, Marion Taffy McCoy with Social Security Administration, Michelle Keeney, the Department of Homeland Security, and Catherine Stewart with Veterans Affairs. And we did want to just acknowledge that Nancy Kirshner did retire from CMS at the end of August, and so she will no longer be serving as a working group member as of September. And we also want to acknowledge Michelle Keeney, who will no longer serve as an active working group member as of this month. And so we just thank them both for their tremendous contributions and wish them well. Okay, and from SAMHSA, we want to shout out our working group members, including Roxanne Castaneda with the Center for Mental Health Services and the Division of Community Behavioral Health, John Berg and the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment, Joseph Bullock with SAMHSA's National Mental Health and Substance Use Policy Laboratory, Leah Compton also with CMHS and the Division of Community Behavioral Health, and Tiffany Russell with SAMHSA's 988 and Behavioral Health Crisis Coordinating Office. Okay, and then of course we have to shout out our fabulous non-federal members. So Judge Rathelia Stroud in DeKalb County, Georgia, Judge Steve Leifman in Miami-Dade, Florida, Ron Bruno, formerly CIT International, I think now Crisis Response Programs and Training, Catherine Warburton with the California Department of State Hospitals, and Trinidad Arguello with Compostela Community and Family Cultural Institute. And our meeting frequency, we're meeting bi-monthly. Next slide, please. Okay, so regarding our working group's primary focus, our discussions have really centered on, all sequential intercepts, as our recommendations support the use of diversion at all points of the sequential intercept model in order to provide quality treatment and recovery supports. So since April, our primary focus has been on intercepts 0 through 2, community services and diversion from law enforcement contact, initial court hearings, and initial detention. Priority recommendations are 4.1, so across all intercepts, and 4.3, diversion. And just to recap, recommendations 4.1 really address the need to prioritize diversion at all intercepts in the SIM in favor of trauma-informed, accessible, culturally and linguistically competent, and developmentally appropriate mental health treatment and recovery services for both adults and youth. And then recommendation 4.3 is to enhance diversion and crisis mental health services to divert people with SMI, SED, and COD from the justice system before arrest and at all stages of the SIM, and build the capacity of first responders to interact with this population in a de-escalating and trauma-informed manner. And just to note that recommendations 4.3 through 4.8 really address the specific intercepts in the SIM, again, prioritizing diversion and access to quality care throughout. Now I'll turn it over to Karen Gentile to discuss our triumphs and trials. Karen?
Thank you, Maya. So since the last ISMIC meeting in March, the work group met 3 times as a full work group and once with just federal members. So our meetings continue to consist of information sharing and discussions that are advisory in nature to inform the federal government's work. We, as co-stewards, continuously solicit discussion topics, and work group members are really active. They suggest topics and send articles and reports to discuss. Federal members are also continue to bring publicly available information to the work group to ask for input to inform the federal work. So some of the topics we've covered since the last full ISMIC meeting in our discussions are system-wide strategies for diversion programming, 988 and its intersection with criminal justice issues. And there was a Tiffany Russell from the 988 office in SAMHSA actually presented, and we had a full discussion around that. Racial disparities in diversion programs. There was a discussion based on an article that one of our work group members sent out. Legal challenges faced by people with SMI experiencing homelessness. And the work group was actually able to inform an agenda and provide discussion, help to provide discussion points for the SAMHSA HUD event that was mentioned. A presentation by SAMHSA funded SMI advisor on technical assistance for providers serving people with SMI involved in the criminal justice system. And then we've had discussions about competence to stand trial and competency restoration. Next slide, please. Another triumph that we've had is that we've been able to agree to modify some of our work somewhat based on discussions on sort of a pulse check on where we are and what we want to be doing. So in May, we had a federal members only meeting and it started the discussion. And then in the full work group meeting in June, we all agreed to shift our focus a bit. So there will be 2 lines of work within the work group. One is to continue the information sharing and advisory discussions. Those are so incredibly important. And the other, the new line is to conceptualize and directly guide the development of concrete deliverables to contribute to the field in a more direct way.
Karen,
Yes.
Can you move a bit closer to your mic? I think folks are having trouble hearing.
Okay. Can you hear me better at all?
Yeah, that's a little bit better.
Okay.
Can folks still hear okay? Okay.
I'll try to speak up a little bit more.
All right. Thank you. I know I was having trouble with my mic yesterday as well. I think it's something with our technology is a bit off, but
okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, absolutely. It's just to recap really quickly. So in the June and May and June meetings, we decided to have 2 recurring lines of work within the work group. One is to continue the information sharing and advisory discussions. And then the second is to add conceptualization and direct guidance on the development of concrete deliverables to contribute more directly to the field. So the other decision that we made at that time was to change our meeting frequency from monthly to bi-monthly. Next slide, please. So we did not identify any major challenges in our work as a work group, but we just want to make a note that we did, as a result of the pulse check and the trying discussion on process improvement, we made the changes that I described in the last slide based on the discussion that we had. And we continuously ask as a work group for feedback to ensure that the work group is meeting the needs to move the work forward. Next slide, please. I think we're at the point of discussion. I think we may be just asking for.
Yeah. So Judge Leifman, looks like you have a question. And
Yeah,
thank
I
you for
just
that report out, team.
Thank you. What I didn't see that I thought we had recommended was the idea of maybe piloting some I don't know what the phrase is, but we had talked about one of the problems we saw was that we have all these amazing federal programs and they're not coordinated at all, and they're kind of one-offs. And so I'll give you the classic example. I sit on the board of the Corporation Supportive Housing, and they were telling me that they get this great HUD money and they're building these amazing facilities, but they're nowhere close to any community mental health services. And so they can't get the clients that are in supportive housing the services that they need. And so we had talked about the idea of some kind of pilot where a community could apply for an array of services where they would look at what their needs are. And, that's to me, the ideal outcome of ISMIC is that it's a coordinated approach with all the different agencies as opposed to these one-offs that communities give up on because they don't see the benefit or the major outcome when you don't get the whole array of service. And so the idea would be where a community could apply to a major group of services where you would get the HUD dollars, you would get, the Certified Community Behavioral Health Center, you would get DOJ's diversion dollars, and the entire community could then work with all of these services so that we're actually getting the kind of outcomes we all desire. And I think that should be one of the recommendations in here. I thought it was.
Absolutely, Judge Leifman. I thank you for bringing that up. I think that was one of the things that we were referring to just generally as sort of deliverables and how we can directly contribute to the field. So that pilot is one of the things that we've discussed. And we also discussed some a possible written resource to sort of accompany a possible pilot as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Judge, for that question. And again, thank you, Karen and Maya for the report out. Any other questions or comments? Okay. All right. So why don't we, we'll go right to the motion to accept the report. So I'll entertain a motion to accept the report. And I believe it's with the addition that you recommended, Judge.
So moved. Thank you.
Okay, may I have a second?
Second.
Okay, and would all ISMIC members unmute, and if all in favor say aye?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you. And any opposed, say nay? All right, thank you. So the report is accepted. And thank you again, team, for that report out and for the work on that. Okay, so we are now, looks like we're right up against lunch. And again, so really want to thank everyone for the work that they're doing. We are going to go ahead and take a break for lunch. And I am turning it over now to Pam, who is going to give us a little bit of logistics there.
Thank you, Dr. Delphin-Rittman. So we're at the top of the hour. So for now, what we can do is take that 1 hour break, come back at 1 o'clock. Please do not log off of the Zoom webinar. If you could just go ahead and mute your line and go ahead and stop your video. And then once we return back from break, we will go into the next part of the agenda.
Okay, fantastic, fantastic. And thank you again, Work Group 4, for all that work. All right, so we'll be back in a little bit. So have a good lunch, everyone. Hope everyone had a good lunch. So a couple things. So we realized, we're so thrilled that we actually have 22 public comments that were sent in. And so what we're going to do is we do have a 10-minute break about midway through. We're actually going to work through that break. We're trying to gain a little bit of extra time because we want to be able to allow a little bit more time for the public comments since we received 22, which may be a record for the ISMIC. And so what we'll do is, we'll ask everyone also if you can, make your reports just a little bit shorter. That will get us more time as well. And then again, we will use that 10 minutes. And I think that should get us there because we do have a half hour set aside. And then if we can gain the 10 minutes with the reports, with our break, and then maybe another 10 minutes total from the various report outs and discussions, I think that should get us there. So, okay, so we will dive right in and appreciate everyone, staying to their time. But we're excited. So next we're going to hear from work group number 1, and we'll hear from Peggy O'Brien and Nima Seth, Dr. Nima Seth. And so I'll turn it over to Peggy and Nima.
Thank you. Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a great lunch. So Dr. Nima Seth, who's the Senior Medical Advisor at CMHS, and I are the co-stewards of the ISMIC Working Group on Data and Evaluation. Next slide, please. So our ISMIC working group meets every 2 months, and our current federal members are, in addition to Nima and myself, Kate Beislein from SAMHSA CMHS, Joel Dubinitz of ASBE, the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation, Jennifer Homensky and Michael Schoenbaum from NIMH, Kirsten Painter from Neidler ACL, Dr. Mina Villingham of OASH, and Sandra Resnick and Jessica Barber of the VA. In addition to Sandy and Jessica, I want to note that both Eric Hatz and Edward Liebman were valued members of our group, but left the VA during the past 6 months. So they are listed on this slide as former members. We didn't want to overlook them because we very much appreciate the work that they did with our group for a long time. We also want to recognize our longstanding non-federal member, Dr. Jennifer Higgins of Commonwealth GrantWorks. Next slide, please. So priority 1.6 relates to using data to improve the quality of care and outcomes. And because measurement-based care, or MBC, is a proven practice to accomplish that, it informs and guides person-centered treatment. And that has been so far the primary focus of our group over the past year. In the spring meeting of ISMIC, our related priority recommendations were to finalize a brief report on measurement-based care and to work in conjunction with a small federal work group to continue fleshing out discrete components of implementation of MBC in community-based settings that provide behavioral health services. Next slide, please. To that end, first, our group finalized and in June published use of measurement-based care for behavioral health care in community settings, a brief report on the ISMIC website. Secondly, we used both the ISMIC working group and the smaller federal group meetings to continue to learn more about aspects of measurement-based care, including incorporation and use of accreditation standards, use in federally qualified health centers, and use in child and adolescent populations, which you will hear more about in a little bit from Dr. Elizabeth Connors of Yale University. Third, we built on these and earlier efforts to participate in a CMHS-sponsored convening of subject matter experts on measurement-based care in June. Next slide, please. So I hesitate to call these trials. I prefer to think of them as natural next steps. So what we're planning to do under priority 1.6 is to move forward with planning some more concrete steps to facilitate implementation of measurement-based care under priority 1.6, building on what we learned from the convening and from other resources. And related to priority 1.6, but fulfilling priority 1.7, in a way that flows naturally from our work on 1.6. Going forward, we want to focus 1.7 on quality measurement that measures use of MBC in community-based behavioral health settings. Presently, priorities 1.7a focuses on ensuring that quality measurement efforts include mental health. We know, however, that there are well over 100 existing formal quality measures related to behavioral health, the majority of which do relate to mental health. And priority 1.7b presently focuses on linking the implementation of measurement-based care and behavioral health quality measures. To tailor our focus in a meaningful way that permits us to move forward with both priorities, we therefore recommend that priority 1.7 be simplified to read as follows. Identify and work to build on previous efforts to develop a quality measure that measures use of measurement-based care in community-based behavioral health settings. And we seek the approval of the ISMIC to tailor priority 1.7 accordingly. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Elizabeth Connors, Assistant Professor of Psychiatry at Yale University. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peggy. And I'd like to start, if it's okay, by just putting the ISNIC MBC report that you referred to in the chat. I think it goes to hosts and panelists. So if there's a way to just make sure everyone has that link, I think it would be great. That report is absolutely outstanding. So if you haven't seen it yet, or you're newer to MBC and you just like kind of a breakdown of what it is and its relevance in community-based settings, I highly recommend it. I'm not going to go into a lot of depth about what measurement-based care is during this 15-minute or so presentation, but hopefully if you're not familiar, you'll get a sense of what it is from the definitions I provide. And I just really appreciate Peggy, Nima, and the Data and Evaluation Work Group for inviting me to present on measurement-based care implementation. I'll be focusing on children, adolescents, and schools and other community-based settings. Next slide, please. So I do want to start with acknowledgements because in my MBC work, I'm usually positioned as a researcher, implementation consultant, trainer, or evaluator. So I have tons of gratitude for the practice partners that I have the opportunity to learn from and with in the field, as well as some organizations who also support MBC research, policy, and practice for the field more broadly. Next slide. So, and you can kind of advance through and show all the components on this slide. There's a little animation. Perfect, thanks. So the research on measurement-based care with children and adolescents is less developed when you compare it to the body of literature that we have on this practice in the adult populations. But the same promising trends and outcomes are still coming out of the research we have, which is really exciting. So we do see better and faster symptom improvement and decreases in psychological distress for young people when their psychotherapy includes MBC as compared to psychotherapy that does not have this practice. We see that improvements, both rate of improvement and whether there's any improvement at all, might vary depending on who's filling out the measures. So whether it's the young person themselves, the parent or caregiver, the therapist, sometimes the teacher is reporting on these measures. Everyone has a little bit of different opinion about what's going on, which is really natural and typical in child psychotherapy. So sometimes we see different trends and improvement depending on which rater we're looking at. The dosage or frequency of measure administration and use also matters. There's a general trend of more frequent administration of these measures being positively associated with better outcomes, which is basically to say that when this practice becomes a habit, it's a routine, it's part of every session or almost every session, that's where we really see the big benefits from collecting these measures, using them in session, talking about them with the young person and their parent to really guide treatment. And a recent meta-analysis, the Ronstadt et al. 2023, found that the effect sizes of MBC may actually be trending larger than for youth populations than for adult populations. So that was really an exciting finding that was just released. Next slide. There are some clinical considerations when using MBC with children and adolescents. For those of you with your clinical hats on in the audience, you might be wondering, how is this practice a little bit different? There are several things that come to mind, although certainly this isn't an exhaustive list. But the clinical cutoffs for standardized measures with children and adolescents sometimes ask you to enter the age, grade, and binary gender to actually return the clinical cutoff. And that's based on the populations that the measure was initially norm referenced on. But of course, child development is very dynamic. And also we have gender diverse youth. So, those specific characteristics may or may not be the best representation of, where their clinical cutoff should be. So it's just something to be mindful of. There's also always conversation about how old a child needs to be to really understand and accurately report on their experience of progress in treatment. So self-report is a topic that comes up a lot for our 4, 5, 6, 7, sometimes 8-year-olds. And then there's developmental variations within that, of course. I touched on the multiple reporter piece. This is something that's very endogenous to child psychotherapy. We always recommend that we have caregiver partnership and that there's a role in treatment. And so if the caregiver has a role in treatment, they also should have a role in completing measures, and we should be sharing those measures with each other and kind of talking about feedback together. The topic of confidentiality does come up, especially in the adolescent space. Are my parents going to see these measures? Is this something we're all going to talk about together? How's that going to go? And so there's some guidelines that we have and clinical consultation we provide around how to be just super transparent with that. So the informed consent process involves things like how we're going to use and share and view measures as part of our work together. And then a newer area I would say that I'm really excited about is complementing our standardized norm reference measures with individualized or idiographic measures. That's certainly relevant in adult work, but is coming up more and more in child work as well. Next slide. So most of my work with measurement-based care right now is in schools. So I just wanted to give a quick pitch for the importance of this practice in the school setting. Schools actually deliver more mental health treatment to children and adolescents than any other child serving sector. So this is a major access point for families and a very important setting to ensure that what we're doing is evidence-based and that there's high quality services in this setting. We also know that MBC is really consistent with goals of the education system to be data-driven. There are already structures in place, such as things like response to intervention, progress monitoring and feedback, and data-driven decision-making that schools really aspire toward. And so MBC is super compatible with those goals. Next slide. As outlined in the ISMIC report brief, I do use the Collect, Share, Act version model of measurement-based care in all of our training and support and research. And this really helps us break down the clinical process of MBC. So it can be very clear to clinicians what they're expected to do when we're talking about measurement-based care as a practice. So we don't want them to get stuck on just collecting the measures. We want to make sure that they're providing a rationale for how and when these measures will be used and really move them toward the process of sharing, providing that feedback of what they see in the measure, asking open-ended questions of what the young person and the parent is experiencing, and then using that information to really make adjustments in real time to the treatment approach. That's the ACT part. So we're going to make action-oriented decisions together based on the progress that is being reported. Next slide. When I talk about MBC in schools, I tweak the definition a little bit. It is still the routine collection and use of measures, but we make sure to underscore that we're talking about student and parent reported measures. And we also make sure to let schools know that we're talking about their tier 2 and tier 3 interventions, not the universal kind of population-wide stuff they're doing with the whole student body, but really those early intervention and treatment services. And as always, we're doing this work to guide shared decision-making. Next slide. And you can feel free to advance through those bullets. Thank you. One of my favorite things about implementing MBC in schools in particular is it kind of starts poking at the black box of our services. It pushes us to go back to the basics, to the foundations of what's important in good quality interventions. You can't just start measuring progress one day if you haven't done a lot of the other important pieces to really undergird progress monitoring. And so I like this piece of MBC implementation because often it brings clinicians and system leaders back to some foundations around what are they doing in terms of their initial assessment, how are they identifying targets and co-creating measurable goals, what's in their intervention plan, and then from there, how are we monitoring progress over time? So we see a lot of other quality improvement areas crop up when we start implementing MBC in these settings. Next slide. But like any other evidence-based practice, the actual implementation is slow. So you can see my snail here that's hanging out in between the research and practice gap. This is true for MBC. Fewer than 20% of clinicians report collecting data prior to sessions. And so an important activity is actually asking clinicians, what are the barriers that they're facing in different settings? So there's a table here on the right of a national survey we conducted a few years ago with school mental health clinicians to tell us exactly what they were up against with this practice. And I highly recommend that we continue to pursue clinician feedback so that they can let us know what is getting in the way of them using MBC in practice. And that's really going to inform setting specific implementation solutions. Next slide. So something we hear from clinicians often is that they don't know what measures are available, especially measures in the public domain. They're not sure how to find these things. They don't know how to score them. They really need places that they can go to identify measures that are appropriate and really for a variety of child and adolescent presenting concerns. So this SHAPE screening and assessment library is something I've had the good fortune to be a part of the development of. It is in the public domain, and it's a resource that I developed with the National Center for School Mental Health that's available to the field, where child and adolescent clinicians can go in and find measures that they like and need that suit their clients' presenting concerns, age range, language, what reporters are looking for, etc. Next slide. So I want to tell you just in the last few minutes here, a couple stories about MBC implementation in child and adolescent settings. And the first is with Expanded School Mental Health Network in Anne Arundel County, not far from Bethesda, where many of you are based. And this was a group that really was centered around their school district school mental health system, which they implemented by partnering with 5 community mental health agencies. So in totality, this was actually a pretty large multi-agency group that decided they wanted to take on measurement-based care together. They wanted to select similar measures, and they wanted to partner with the school district in this process to really drive quality in student mental health services. But also, one of their explicit goals in the beginning was to aggregate these data so that they could communicate the value of those behavioral health services to the school district. And there's special considerations around aggregating MBC data that I'd be happy to talk more with you about offline, but for the purposes of this project, that really was one of their goals. And so this slide just kind of shows you that they went through a multi-year process of implementation. They continued far beyond school year 2019, but they started this in school year 2017, really identifying their goals, getting clear on that, making sure they were getting feedback from stakeholders to select and test measures, with the next year as an initial pilot year, kind of partial implementation, and then the third year really more of a full implementation. And only then were they really beginning to start to aggregate and look at the impact of their work. Next slide. And so here's some of the findings after 2 years of implementation in that particular system. They were finding that the majority of their students had multiple assessments in their feedback system. Clinicians on average were doing this with most youth, and they were able to look at the percentage of youth who improved in their system and then further break that down by what proportion of students are progressing better than expected, what proportion are kind of as expected or maybe flat. You could think about it, we're maintaining them at their current levels, and what percentage are sort of off track where we would expect for their interventions. And this was just really important quality improvement data more than anything else. It gave them some things that they could get curious about and think about how to improve what they were doing. One of the exciting things that came out is their effect sizes were larger than we see in most of the published literature. So it's really cool that they could kind of stack what they were doing up against what we see in the research. And they did also find that dose-response relationship. So the more often that they were administering these measures, in those cases, it was associated with positive effects. Next slide. So often systems ask me, how do we plan ahead for implementation? And we see with MBC and other initiatives that it's a little bit like a kitchen sink approach, right? Like we're stuffing every tool into our rocket ship to try to get this new initiative off the ground. And what I recommend is what's consistent with implementation science is that actually we should be more strategic than that. We should be really strategic to select the types of implementation solutions we need for that context and setting and practice. So in the next slide, I just wanted to share some top implementation strategies that we have found to be relevant for measurement-based care in schools. And this was as a result of some national stakeholder engaged work that we did with clinicians, clinical administrators, and researchers who are involved in school mental health. They reviewed vignettes of what MBC is, and they provided recommendations about what implementation strategies would be best suited. Fortunately for us, the 6 that rose to the top actually could be combined together. So this is now a multi-component implementation package that we are partnering with districts to implement and see if this strategic approach can help them in their MVC process. So on the next slide, I just have a little bit of information about Focus, which is our current pilot of this work in Connecticut. Stanford Public Schools is continuing this into a 3rd year, this current school year. And these districts have taken on MVC as a quality improvement initiative for their whole district. This isn't like an opt-in research study anymore, right? This is like, we are all doing this in some form or fashion, and they're using the PCOMS measurement system. Next slide. So what we're finding in terms of the implementation outcomes is what you would expect. Implementation is gradual. It does not happen overnight. We're seeing growth over time. But over time, we're seeing more and more measures being collected in more sessions, more adoption by clinicians. Having a feedback system helps us monitor this and provide feedback. And one of the things that's been really interesting to me, maybe not surprising, but I think important to document, is that 90% of these clinicians reported not collecting or using any standardized progress measures prior to Focus, meaning that this is a big practice change for them. So we keep looking at consultation call attendance and other indicators that show us that they're interested and engaged in continuing this practice improvement. Next slide. And these are just the types of graphs that we're looking at to track implementation over time. We look at the number of raters or respondents with one or more measure by clinician, so we can kind of understand how that is shaking out. And we look at this, these are December to May, you see we kind of look at school year. And then we also look at the total number of measures completed by clinicians. So these are just some of the kinds of metrics that we're monitoring to check progress over time. And finally, on the next slide, I just wanted to share with you some of my thoughts on future directions for MVC and usual care, children's mental health services, which by and large are under-resourced agencies or systems. And so I think we really have an opportunity to stand up child and family focused MVC and also think about how that might meet their organizational goals simultaneously. I absolutely love shared learning via learning collaboratives and learning communities. So I would love to see more proliferation of that implementation approach to support this practice. I think we have a responsibility, though, to address the cost of MVC. There's a lot of system level barriers here, both in implementation cost and measurement feedback system cost. Ultimately, if we can build and replicate some sustainable solutions, I think that would be very beneficial for these systems. Ongoing professional development and supervision is always challenging in these settings, but I think it's a place that there is a lot of recent growth. There's more implementation tools and guidance needed for the field, and also thinking about how we message what MVC brings, what's really the value added in ways that systems can understand and is consistent with what they care about, right? So like when we talk about ongoing engagement or treatment retention, addressing issues of equity in our systems, using this practice for complex cases, and also addressing large caseloads. Those are things that MVC can help address, but I think we're not messaging MVC yet in that way. And then my just final 2 slides are resources slides. The next slide has some cool resources you can check out if you want to learn more. And then on the last slide is my contact information. If you have any questions, I would love to hear more from you. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Connors. I mean, that was such a rich presentation, such valuable, important information. I mean, we know that young people, certainly struggled even before the pandemic, and as a function of the pandemic, we're seeing increasing challenges. And so to be able to measure the impact of care and to have metrics in place to get at some of those experiences can really help to drive better outcomes. So really appreciate your work and presentation. So, I also want to remind the group that that this work group, so work group 1 is recommending a change. So next slide, is recommending a change in the language to priority 1.7. And so the recommended language that they're offering is there on the slide. So to identify and work to build on previous efforts to develop a quality measure that measures the use of MVC in community-based behavioral health settings. And so that's the recommended language. Next slide. So why don't we go ahead now and we'll open it up to any questions that folks have, and then we'll move on to a vote as well. So any questions or comments from the group? And again, many thanks to the work group for their work on this. Okay. All right. So we'll go on to a vote then. So can we get a motion to accept the working group's report? And this is just the report, and then we'll do the priority area second.
So moved. Sandy Resnick.
Thank you, Sandy. And may I get a second?
Ron Bruno for second.
Thank you, Ron. And so all in favor, say aye.
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 Great, thank you. Any nays? All right, so thank you. That vote is accepted, or that report is accepted. And so now we'll go ahead and entertain a motion to accept the recommendations to 1.7, priority 1.7. May I get a motion related to that priority area to accept the change?
So moved.
Thank you, David. May I have a second to accept the change?
Second.
All right, thank you. Was that Brian?
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. And so all in favor, say aye.
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 Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you. Any nays? All right. So we have accepted the change. And so thank you again to that work group for their work. So now we're going to transition to our next working group 2, which is access and engagement. Please note also that Commander Barry, who has been a faithful member of this group, was recently deployed, so he's not with us today. So therefore, we'll be hearing from Jenny Vitas, who will provide a brief topical presentation, and then Tara Andrews, who will report out for the group. And so I will turn it over to you, Dr. Vitas.
Hello, everyone. I'm here to talk to you today about certified community behavioral health clinics. And how that model of the CCBHC model relates to our access and engagement workgroup goals. And as Dr. Delphin Rittman said, Commander Barry has been deployed to Maui. So I am sitting in his stead. And I, as a public health advisor, work almost 100% of my time on CCBHC. So I'm just gonna try to briefly and concisely walk you through the model and kind of explain how it relates to access to care. So we'll do a brief overview. I'm going to talk about how this relates to expanding access to care. I'm going to talk about crisis response, telehealth allowances, and expansion of peer and family support services. So next slide, please. Okay. On October 31st, 1963, President John F. Kennedy signed the Mental Health Services Act. And so we are coming up on that 60th anniversary. And what this act did was it supported construction of community mental health centers across the country. And it kind of paved the way towards deinstitutionalization and just making it easier to get good care in your community. Next slide, please. Okay. CCBHC, what is it? CCBHC brings together a comprehensive range of services, evidence-based practices, and other supports based on a community needs assessment. Community needs assessment is an important piece. I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. CCBHCs provide for improved access to mental health and substance use disorder services, especially increasing capacity to respond, serve individuals across the lifespan with mental health and or substance use disorders. And they must meet some very specific criteria to be certified as a CCBHC. And I'm going to go through the criteria very briefly in a few minutes. The model has very much caught on in recent years and has a lot of support. And federal agency partner roles in the CCBHC initiative. 3 federal agencies work very collaboratively to implement the CCBHC. SAMHSA has been responsible for planning grants, protocols, developing criteria, and administering the expansion grants. Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services has been responsible for payment systems and cost reports. and Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation, ASPE, does a national evaluation. Next slide, please. Okay, and this slide shows a map of CCBHCs across the United States as of March 2023. As you can see on the slide, there are now more than 500 CCBHCs across 46 states, District of Columbia, Guam, and Puerto Rico. Next slide, please. Okay, and what I'm going to talk about here is kind of the crux of the model. This slide summarizes the model in kind of a dense little nutshell. So I'm going to briefly talk on the left side of the slide, that lists the criteria, kind of the categories of criteria. Criteria involve staffing, very specific staffing needs, availability and accessibility of services, making it easier for people to find care and connect to care and access it. Care coordination is kind of the heart of this model. In a CCBHC, you can't refer someone out and just punt them out for other services and not really keep track of what's going on. With a CCBHC, you coordinate that care. You help ensure that people connect to where you're referring them to and that you remain in communication with the agency that you're referring them to. So you're not just sort of, sending people out without following up. Scope of services, and I'll talk about that in just a second. There are 9 core services that CCBHCs must provide. Quality and other reporting. CCBHCs must have an electronic health record. They must collect certain measures, and they must have a CQI, continuous quality improvement plan. Finally, organizational authority and governance. Lots of emphasis on involving consumers and family members in planning and direction of the CCBHC. Now, the 9 core services that must be provided either directly or through formal partnerships: crisis services, screening, diagnosis, and risk assessment, psychiatric rehabilitation services, outpatient primary care screening and monitoring, targeted case management, peer, family support and counselor services, community-based mental health care for veterans, person and family-centered treatment planning, and outpatient mental health and substance use services. Next slide, please. Okay, and regarding expanding access to care in CCBHC, no individuals are denied services. It doesn't matter whether they can pay or not, or where they live, or whether they have a permanent address or not. No individual can be denied services. And sliding fee discount schedules must be utilized to make sure that services remain affordable. There also must be extensive outreach conducted to find out who in the catchment area is underserved, what populations are not accessing services, and what can we do to improve this. Next slide, please. Okay, community needs assessment. All CCBHCs must do a community needs assessment, and they're very individualized and local to the catchment area. Different locations are going to have different needs, including different levels of transportation needs. Some areas, transportation might be a huge barrier to accessing care. Other areas, maybe not so much. Hours of operations, locations, use of telehealth. So each CCBHC needs to do kind of a deep dive into their own community to see what's needed. And they need to get voices from consumers, family members, other folks, other providers in the area, community leaders. All those things must be taken into account when kind of figuring out what the needs are. Timely access to services and assessment is required. Preliminary triage completed at first contact. If individual is in crisis, there needs to be services within 3 hours, 1 business day for an urgent need and 10 business days for routine needs. and a comprehensive assessment must be completed within 60 days to inform a treatment plan, which should be updated no less frequently than every 6 months. Next slide, please. Okay, in terms of improved access to care and what this work group is really about, according to implementation findings from the Medicaid demonstration program, CCBHCs have increased access to care using a whole variety of strategies. Some are shown on the left side of the slide. Open access scheduling, services provided outside the brick and mortar clinic, use of telehealth, outreach to underserved populations, and expanded hours, including evening and weekend hours. And then the right side of the slide shows the percentage of CCBHCs that provided services in a particular area outside of the physical clinic. 78% were able to provide services in consumer homes, for instance. Next slide, please. And I'll just briefly touch here this slide, and 1.2 million clients are currently served by the 249 CCBHCs that responded to the evaluation. Estimated 2.1 million people currently served across all the active CCBHCs and grantees. And I'll skip the rest because in the interest of time, can we move to the next slide? Okay. CCBHCs and access to crisis care, tying back to recommendation 2.1 from the Way Forward, access to crisis care. Protecting Access to Medicare Act, or PAMA, requires provisions of these 3 crisis behavioral health services: 24-hour mobile crisis teams, emergency crisis intervention service, and crisis stabilization. As part of the certification process, folks have to clearly define each term as they're using it, but services provided must also include suicide crisis response and services capable of addressing crises related to substance abuse and intoxication, including ambulatory and medical detoxification. States may elect to require the employment of peers on crisis teams. CCBHCs are also required to have an established protocol specifying the role of law enforcement during the provision of crisis services. Next slide, please. And just following along with the access to crisis care, CCBHCs must establish care coordination partnerships with or participate in the 988 Lifeline network. They're required to provide and or display education about 988, mobile crisis team response time expectations, 1 hour in urban settings, 2 hours in rural or frontier settings. Next slide, please. Okay, again, following along with the access to crisis care, providing minimum urgent care walk-in services with access to services that address the immediate need, as well as the de-escalation of the crisis and connection to a safe and least restrictive care setting. Must engage in drug and alcohol overdose and prevention activities, must work with local hospital emergency departments to assist in the process for individuals who are in crisis who present to the emergency department, and working with local law enforcement to improving the safety of individuals in crisis. Next slide, please. Okay, then in terms of recommendation 2.7 from the Way Forward, telehealth allowable to alleviate shortages. Well, the CCBHC uses telehealth, telemedicine, video conferencing, remote patient monitoring, all kinds of other technologies to the extent possible, and aligning with the preferences of the person receiving services. Although in-person services are preferred, emergency or current needs and the initial evaluation can be conducted via phone or via telehealth and video conferencing. Again, taking into account the preferences of the person who's receiving the services. Next slide, please. Following along with this, telehealth can be used to accomplish the following when in-person contact is delayed or just not an option. Mobile crisis and telehealth and telemedicine may be used to connect individuals in crisis. Sort of an example, peer service visits someone in their home and brings a tablet, and then they and the client can communicate with a provider back at the clinic. screening and assessments, outpatient services. Next slide, please. Okay. And then finally, CCBHCs and required peer and family supports, which lines up with recommendation 2.8A from the way forward. CCBHCs are responsible for directly providing or through a DCO peer supports, including peer specialists and recovery coaches, peer counseling, family and caregiver supports. CCBHCs can receive a supplemental payment based on a cost-based prospective payment system rate for each client. And the rate includes the cost of providing services that include coverage for certified peer specialists, peer family specialists, and certified peer recovery specialist services. So definitely looking for ways to increase peers in the workforce, expanding the workforce in the realm of peer and family support. Again, peer services can include peer-run crisis respites and recovery centers, transition between different levels of care, peer education and leadership development, navigation support, behavioral health and crisis support, mutual support, and self-help groups. Next slide. Now, I know I ran through that very quickly. I'm trying to be mindful of time. This slide lists the landing pages where you can read more at your leisure about CCBHC. And I know that there's a lot of information, and criteria were updated in March of 2023, and they will be, clinics have until July 1st, 2024 to get into compliance with these updated criteria, and you can read more about that on the website provided. So that is the last slide in my part of the presentation. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Jenny, for that presentation. I'm Tara Andrews, and as Dr. Delphin Rittman mentioned, I recently joined this work group and to support Commander David Berry as a steward. Unfortunately, Commander Berry is unable to be with us today since he's been deployed. So I'm going to go over our work group report. Next slide, please. Here we have a brief overview of the composition of our work group. You just heard from Jenny Vadas, who did an excellent job presenting on the CCBHC, and she provides steward support to our group. We'd also like to take a moment to recognize and express our gratitude for all of our federal and non-federal members listed here. And you can see that our work group does meet frequently throughout the year, but the timeliness of those meetings varies depending on availability. Next slide, please. So our work group's overall focus has been on increasing access to behavioral health services. As Jenny highlighted moments ago, the CCBHC nicely aligns with priority recommendations seen here. 2.1, which is focused on defining and implementing a national standard for crisis care. And 2.2, to transform the behavioral health crisis services continuum through partnerships at the state, federal, and local levels. Obviously, priorities related to workforce development have been a very hot topic over the past year, specifically priorities 2.8 and 2.8A, which focus on maximizing the behavioral health workforce, including coverage of peer and family support specialists in the federal health benefit programs. As Jenny explained, the CCBHC has many criteria requirements, and peer and family support specialists are a required component of the CCBHC model. Okay, so our triumphs. Since our last meeting, we've had several triumphs related to CCBHC expansion and peer support services. The CCBHC model criteria was initially released in 2015 and has been recently updated earlier this year. These criteria aim to improve access to care and extend crisis services that align with 988 and best practice toolkits. In addition to releasing updated criteria, SAMHSA has also added an additional 15 states to the CCBHC planning grants. These grants will allow the states to further develop their CCBHC services. Over the past year, SAMHSA has disseminated the peer support services in crisis care advisory and recently released SAMHSA's national model standards for peer support certification. Next slide, please. Our trials. So the Access and Engagement Work Group will continue to explore and work with SAMHSA's Office of Recovery, and we'll have particular focus on advancing the utilization of peer support services, including the expansion and reimbursement and national standards. We also plan to engage HRSA's Office of Telehealth to further expand and sustain telehealth services in the post-pandemic era. And while workforce issues continue to pose an ongoing challenge across the country, they're further magnified by crisis in our communities, particularly following natural disasters like the Maui wildfires. Next slide, please. And this concludes our work group report. Any questions or feedback is welcome. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Tara. You know, I was on mute when you guys started. So welcome to the ISMIC. I know this is your first ISMIC meeting. And so thrilled to have you as part of this and at SAMHSA. And so why don't we just go ahead and open it up for questions. And again, many thanks to the full work group and to the work group chairs as well. So any questions or comments for the work group? Okay. So then can I get a motion to accept the work group's report?
So moved, Jennifer Higgins.
Thank you, Jennifer. And may I have a second?
Ron Bruno, second.
Thank you, Ron. All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, any nays, say nay. Great. All right, so the report has been accepted. And so now, we are going to turn it over to Corey Minor-Smith from HUD on behalf of the Treatment and Recovery Work Group. And Corey will do a brief presentation, and then we'll hear a report out from the work group as well. So Corey, happy to turn it over to you.
Am I appearing upside down?
Oh my goodness, yes.
I don't know why.
I have never seen that.
Me either. I thought it was just my camera.
Oh my gosh.
Well, in order not to distract, I will just not have it on. I'm not sure what is going on with that. Thank you, everyone. Corey Minor-Smith with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. I serve as Senior Counsel in the Office of General Counsel, and it is my pleasure to be a part of the Treatment and Recovery Group 3. But I am here to just give a brief overview of HUD programs, and namely being that provided a memo to the ISMIC body, just giving an overview and some details regarding HUD programming. When I first started with ISMIC, I had noted a statement in the treatment and recovery group that welcomed HUD to be a part. And so I have been an active member of the treatment and recovery group since then, and thought it would be helpful to provide an overview of HUD's programs to ISMIC. And I also provided an overview of ISMIC to HUD. With that, I just wanted to share, if we can go to the next slide, information about some of HUD's offices and programs within those offices, and wanting you all to know that federal non-discrimination laws provide housing protections for individuals with disabilities. These protections apply to most private housing, state and local government housing, public housing, and any other federally assisted housing programs and activities. I state that because it's important to know that we cannot directly target any particular group, including those who live with serious mental illness. But because disability is a protected class, we are able to have some of our housing available to those who have disabilities. So, for example, the Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination in housing and housing-related transactions because of disability. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. And Titles 2 and 3 of the Americans with Disabilities Act prohibit discrimination on the basis of disability in all programs, services, and activities of public entities and by private entities that own, operate, or lease places of public accommodation. For people with disabilities, exiting institutional settings, including institutional settings for people with serious mental illnesses, HUD administers 2 programs, and that's the Section 811 Project Rental Assistance, which is the PRA program, and the Mainstream Voucher Program. The Section 811 PRA program awards funds to state housing finance agencies to support set-asides of units within affordable housing developments that will serve people with disabilities leaving institutional settings. The Mainstream Voucher Program provides tenant-based rental assistance to help people with disabilities leaving institutional settings find and afford rental housing. So since 2018, HUD has awarded over 70,000 mainstream vouchers, including 2,200 in early 2023. Later this year, HUD will be making a $212 million available in new funds through the Section 811 PRA program. Next slide, please. I mentioned earlier about the recommendation from the treatment and recovery group as far as HUD being involved with the group. And I just wanted to share with this recommendation, it was stated that housing be made more readily available for people with serious mental illness and SEDs, and that was retained as a priority recommendation. So with this memo that I provided, I'm providing information that shows the exploration of collaborative efforts between HUD to expand access to supportive housing. So we have been actively involved prior to my involvement with ISMIC with different offices within SAMHSA, such as with homelessness and other objectives and initiatives. One minute. So with that, we've also had the opportunity in celebration in October 10th, World Mental Health Day, in which HUD, through me and SAMHSA, put on a virtual World Mental Health Day lunch and learn, where we talked about opportunities for those living with severe mental illness. And we discussed avoiding the criminalization of severe mental illness and different programs that are available, not only with HUD, but also, well, thank you so much, Dr. Shaw. Yes, I'm upright in that picture, but also with SAMHSA. And I thank, again, those who joined. We had 731 in attendance during that virtual 1-hour lunch and learn. And that's just one of many collaborative efforts that HUD has with SAMHSA, and we welcome other opportunities to do the same. So next slide, please. Just talking more about the programs and anti-discrimination laws, just wanted to share how we also have different efforts within the agency to change rules that are available on the Federal Register, such as the discriminatory effects doctrine, which includes disparate impact and the perpetuation of segregation as a tool for addressing policies that unnecessarily cause systemic inequality in housing, regardless of whether they were adopted with discriminatory intent. One of those things is a memo that Secretary Fudge issued in April of last year during Fair Housing Month, in which we, HUD, were called upon to review our policies and procedures to change any things that will unnecessarily cause barriers to housing opportunities, especially when it comes to criminal records, and how that can also be addressed at the local level with organizations like public housing authorities that review lease applications and how it is treated when a person indicates they have a criminal record. So the Restoring the Discriminatory Effects Rule, in which HUD has published a final rule restoring HUD's discriminatory effects standard, a tool for addressing policies that unnecessarily cause the systemic inequality in housing, and also to challenge the policies that unnecessarily exclude people from housing opportunities, including zoning requirements, lending and property insurance, and policies, as I mentioned, regarding criminal records. Accordingly, we believe that the standard is vital to the administration's goal of creating a housing market that is free from both intentional discrimination and policies and practices that have unjustified. They have been unjustified in creating discriminatory effects. Also, touching on another law, which we have mentioned, and we recently celebrated nationally the 50th anniversary of Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. And it has provided accessible housing. And unfortunately, there are still many who struggle to find accessible housing in this country. So HUD is focusing on Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in any program or activity that receives federal funds from HUD. HUD has not updated its Section 504 regulations since 1988. And since 1988, the percentage of the US population with individuals with disabilities has increased and diversified. So HUD has published an advance notice of proposed rulemaking as it relates to the Section 504 regulations, and it will be available for public comment, in which those will be addressed in order to determine any new regulations that will be drafted. So if you haven't already seen that, please check out on the Federal Register for any comments that you or others may want to make. In the next slide, please. Just addressing some of the challenges as well as opportunities. What we see as challenges are affordable and accessible housing availability. As you all may know, there is a national crisis in terms of housing, affordable housing availability. And as we discussed during the Lunch and Learn on World Mental Health Day, there is criminalization that causes a decrease in housing availability, which Secretary Fudge attempted to address through her memo and the directive for our offices to relook at our policies and to find ways to eliminate any barriers due to criminal records and other things that don't have to be necessarily a part of precluding a person from housing based on having a criminal record. Also, funding. We could always use more funding in any of our programs. So funding is always seems to be one of the factors that could be considered a challenge. And homelessness, and most importantly, in my personal capacity, I'm saying most importantly, the stigma that is associated with those living with severe mental illness and their families who work to try to advocate for them and on their behalf. So with that, I will end. Hope that was short enough and that you all gained some time. But if anyone has any questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to me, Corey Miner-Smith, and I am with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Corey. I mean, you know, we so appreciate the collaboration and the partnership. And between the events last month and your work on ISMIC, you're practically honorary SAMHSA. So thank you so much for being with us. And my gosh, you totally get the award because I've never seen an upside down camera. I don't know how that happens.
Yeah, I'm trying it out again to see if I'm still upside down, but now it's not coming on at all.
What a day for technology. But in any case, thank you for being with us, even if it's upside down.
Thank you very much.
We just appreciate your support and collaboration. And so we're going to go ahead now and turn it over to the work group, the treatment and recovery work group. And so we'll hear their report and just want to thank all of the work group members for their work on work group 3. Right.
Thanks very much and good afternoon. I'm Doug Slothelder. I am one of the co-stewards for the Treatment Recovery Working Group. My other co-steward, Nancy Kelly, is helping family today and was not able to be here, but we certainly appreciate her work with this work group. Next slide, please. So the other federal members are Nina Vifilingen, Elash, Richard Davis at Department of Labor, Rhonda Basha at Department of Labor, Sandy Resnick at the VA, Susan Nazrin at NIMH, Corey Miner-Smith, who of course we just heard from at HUD, and Yolanda Luzon at Education. We also want to thank our non-federal members, including David Covington, Raphaelia Stroud, Amanda Lipp, and Johanna Kandel. This work group meets approximately monthly. We had some off months in the summer, but it's been a really valuable and informative work group, and I just want to thank everybody for their participation and their contributions. Next slide. So this work group has been focused on promoting federal adoption and support for evidence-based practices where we find a strong evidence base, but an underuse of these evidence-based practices. And based upon our review some time ago, the 3 priority recommendations that we settled on were supported employment, supportive housing, and SMI, including first episode of psychosis treatment. Next slide, please. So as part of that, as part of recommendation 3.1 in the ISMIC recommendations, which is providing comprehensive continuum of care for people with SMI and SED, this group identified supported employment, including the individual placement and support model, as an underutilized evidence-based practice that deserved and can benefit from promotion and coordination through the ISMIC. Those of you who were in our last full meeting last spring may remember us talking about an upcoming policy academy for states on supported employment for transitional aged youth. That was held successfully in June and got very positive feedback from that. And we are following up on that with our year-long learning collaborative with those same states to build on the learning and the peer learning and plans that were made as part of that policy academy. So we look forward to ongoing work through that learning collaborative. Next slide, please. In addition, in our collaboration around supported employment, the Department of Labor's Aspire initiative continues with 2 new issue briefs on the individual placement and support model of supported employment just posted to the Aspire webpage. One issue brief is focused on IPS for people with co-occurring substance use disorder, and the other is on the cost effectiveness of IPS. The Aspire initiative also recently kicked off its option year and will continue to provide technical assistance to 7 states through the end of July 2024. Also coming up in FY24, SAMHSA will provide train the trainer sessions to 8 states to develop cadres of qualified trainers for supported employment with a special emphasis on transition aged youth. Also in FY24, SAMHSA will be holding another policy academy on the implementation of supported employment, this time with a focus on providing the service through CCBHCs, which we heard about earlier. Next slide, please. Moving on to the next priority area we identified, which was supportive housing. As Corey Miner-Smith spoke about, SAMHSA collaborated with HUD on the Lunch and Learn presentation for World Mental Health Day, addressing supports for individuals with SMI who are homeless, including legal challenges and posed by increasing criminalization of homelessness. And I also want to thank ISMIC Working Group 4 for our collaboration on some of those issues. Also in FY24, SAMHSA plans to update the supported housing toolkit that was first released in 2010 to reflect new research and developments in the field. An additional product plan for FY24 is a guide to HUD vouchers and working with local housing authorities for caseworkers assisting individuals with SMI. So we continue to look for ways to kind of leverage this collaboration and this shared knowledge. And we think these products are going to be really useful in that regard. Also as just described in a presentation by Ms. Miner-Smith, HUD and SAMHSA continue to meet both through the ISMIC and through other one-on-one meetings on a regular basis to explore other opportunities for collaboration around housing and supportive services for individuals with SMI. So I just want to echo Dr. Dolphin-Rittman that we really are very fortunate to have Corey Miner-Smith on this group, and we really appreciate the overall collaboration between HUD and SAMHSA on the issue of homelessness and supportive housing. Next slide, please. And then finally, our third area of focus is early serious mental illness, including first episode of psychosis. And SAMHSA State Technical Assistance Contract has developed an inventory of existing, emerging, and promising evidence-based practices that address the needs of individuals with ESMI, including FEP. We also convened a triage team, essentially a technical expert panel of SMEs on this issue, who made recommendations of evidence-based practices that should receive greater support and promotion, which we will use to guide future decisions in developing products and other kinds of technical assistance that SAMHSA makes in this area. Also, SAMHSA just recently kicked off a new technical assistance center for ESMI, which will be providing direct assistance to the field, as well as developing a variety of guides and other products on evidence-based practices, leveraging those triage team recommendations. So more to come in this area. Next slide, please. So that's the steps we've made since our last full meeting. Looking ahead to some of the challenges. Part of what I talked about in the last meeting is just what this work group potentially covers is so broad. It's never going to be entirely applicable to all members. We really appreciate the participation of all the members. At times, we focus on employment and labor is the lead. We focus on housing and HUD is the lead. But we're just so fortunate to have the membership that we do from all the agencies on this work group. And we really benefit from the shared ideas and the shared problem solving. But it is a challenge that not every area we talk about is going to be fully applicable to every agency. And that's something we continue to work on. The other is sort of making the best kind of collaboration with our non-federal members. They've been certainly extremely valuable for their expertise and their advice and guidance, but we're still also thinking about how best to kind of leverage that connection outside of federal agencies. The relationships are a little more clear-cut between federal agencies on collaboration. So that's another kind of work in progress that we're continuing to discuss. And that is our presentation. So we look forward to any feedback and recommendations. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Doug. And again, many thanks to the work group members, both who are federal members and non-federal members, are really rich, content. And so just want to open it up for discussion now for any questions or comments that folks may have. And Corey, your camera's back. All right. Great. So any questions or comments for this work group? Okay. All right. So we'll just go right to then the vote to accept the working group's report. Can I get a motion to accept this work group's report?
So moved, Ron Bruno.
Thank you, Ron. Can I get a second?
Second, Jennifer Higgins.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Jennifer. So all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Fantastic. And any opposed, say no or nay. All right, this work group report is accepted. So we are on the home stretch and we've made up time. So I think we'll be good in terms of the public comment that we have. So this is our last group, but certainly not least. And I now would like to turn over for a presentation to our financing work group, which includes some partners from CMS, Department of Labor, and Kristen Barino and Beth Baum will be presenting for the Parity work group, or provide a Parity update for the work group. So Kristen and Beth, I'll turn it over to you.
This is Beth. All right, now I'm.
You remuted yourself, Beth.
Okay, gotcha. All right, I think I'm good now. This is Beth Baum from the U.S. Department of Labor, and Jacob Ackerman and I are going to talk a little bit about the recent mental health parity proposed rules and some other information that we issued at the end of July. And then Kirsten's going to talk a little bit about a request for information that she's been working on. So Jacob and I work with our colleagues at the Department of Treasury and IRS, and we issued proposed rules on mental health parity for group health plans and health insurance coverage. And I'm going to give a brief overview of what was in the proposed rules, very high level. Jacob will talk a little bit about some HHS only pieces of the NPRM. My office did a webinar on the NPRM and the rest of the documents that went over an hour, about an hour and 15 minutes into detail. So if you want more detail, you can check out the recording on the EBSA website, but I'm going to try to do the 10-minute version at a very high level. So for background, the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act was enacted by Congress in 2008, just over 15 years ago. And the Departments of Labor, Health and Human Services, and the Treasury issued final regulations in 2013. Then at the end of 2020, Congress enacted the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021, which amended MAPIA to require group health plans and health insurance issuers to perform and document their comparative analyses of any non-quantitative treatment limitations that they impose on mental health or substance use disorder benefits. And non-quantitative treatment limitations, or NQTLs as we abbreviate them, are limits on the scope or duration of treatment that are not quantified. Something like a limit on the number of days or visits would be quantifiable, but non-quantitative treatment limitations are things like medical management techniques and prior authorization requirements. And so the focus of the NPRM, there's a lot that's in the package, but it does really look at these NQTLs. And the overall goal of the proposal is to ensure that individuals with mental health conditions and substance use disorders can benefit from the full protections afforded to them under the law, while also offering guidance to plans and issuers on how to comply with the requirements. And as part of that, consistent with the goal, we propose to add a new purpose section that would act as the moral compass for the MAPIA rules. So there are two parts to the NPRM. We first propose to amend some of the existing MAPIA rules, and then we also propose to add requirements about these comparative analyses that were required under the Consolidated Appropriations Act. And for the first piece of the NPRM, the proposed changes to the existing rules, I really wanted to focus on a couple highlights that relate to the rules for NQTLs today. The existing standard in the 2013 regulations for NQTLs looks at the processes, strategies, evidentiary standards, and other factors that are used to apply an NQTL to mental health or substance use disorder benefits. And the rules require plans and issuers to ensure that those processes, strategies, evidentiary standards, and other factors are applied comparably and not more stringently than those that are used to apply to an NQTL to medical surgical benefits. And so the proposed rules would keep that existing rule for NQTLs, but also prohibit the use of any factor, evidentiary standard that's discriminatory, and then add two more standards for NQTLs. So one of the new standards is similar to the rules for financial requirements like copays and coinsurance, and those quantitative treatment limitations like visit limits. And so that test would require that an NQTL applied on the mental health or substance use disorder side can't be more restrictive than those that apply to medical surgical benefits. And then the other new proposed standard for NQTLs would require plans and issuers to use outcomes data to assess the impact of an NQTL on access to benefits when they're thinking about compliance with the parity standards in operation. The existing rules talk about compliance as written in a group health plan or health insurance policy documents. as well as compliance in operation in the everyday administration of her plan or coverage. We also proposed 2 limited exceptions from parts of these requirements for NQTLs that apply generally accepted independent professional medical or clinical standards. And the second proposed exception was for NQTLs that are designed solely for the purpose of detecting or preventing and proving fraud, waste, and abuse. So those types of NQTLs would get a pass from some of those 3 proposed requirements, but not all of them. So that's the first part of the NQTL, of the NPRM, excuse me. And then the second part was some new regulations that we proposed on the comparative analyses. So the 2013 final regulations that have been applicable for quite a while required plans and issuers to ensure that they complied with all the rules, including the rules for NQTLs. So this part of the analysis kind of builds on that and says, here's how you should document your compliance analysis to make sure that you're complying with the substantive rules. And this builds on some initial guidance that we issued in April of 2021, laying out the content elements for comparative analyses. So the rules include 6 specific content elements for comparative analyses with some detail on what each content element should address, as well as how the federal departments are going to request comparative analyses and the back and forth that will occur between a plan or issuer and the relevant enforcement agency to ultimately determine whether coverage complies with MPIA. So I'll stop there and turn it over to Jacob to talk about the HHS only pieces of the NPRM, and then I can talk about a few other things that we issued at the same time before we turn it over to Kirsten.
Thanks, Beth, and thanks for that great overview of the rule. So Beth covered the majority of the proposal, but I did want to just briefly mention 2 proposals that are specific to HHS. So the first would make clear that the proposals that Beth just covered for MPIA would apply in the same manner to health insurance issuers offering individual health insurance coverage, just in the same way that they would apply to group health coverage. And these would apply for plan years beginning on or after January 1, 2026. The second piece of the HHS proposals has to do with an exemption that's existed since the enactment of MPIA. And this is a provision in the law that said self-funded plans for state and local governmental employees could opt out of the parity requirements. The proposed rule would close that loophole and codify recent changes made by Congress in the 2023 Consolidated Appropriations Act. And this would, by closing this loophole, more than 200 state and local governmental health plans would now have to comply with the parity requirements, providing protections to over 90,000 consumers. So let me turn it back to Beth to continue walking through some of the other proposals.
Thank you. So I just want to mention 3 things that went out at the same time as the proposed rules, and all of these are available on the CMS website or the EBSA website if you're interested in taking a look. With the NPRM, we also issued a technical release, which requests feedback on what types of data plans and issuers should be required to collect and evaluate as part of the requirement that plans and issuers look at that outcomes data as part of their compliance analysis. And that the technical release really focuses on data that's relevant for NQTLs related to network composition. The department stated in the proposal that we really feel that network composition NQTLs are particularly important to focus on because they do inherently affect participant and beneficiary access to mental health and substance use disorder benefits, as well as medical surgical benefits. So the technical release looks at the types of data that plans and issuers would be required to collect and evaluate for those NQTLs, and also solicits feedback on a potential enforcement safe harbor the departments are considering for plans and issuers that meet certain thresholds for the data metrics they're required to collect and evaluate. And with the proposed rules and the technical release, at the same time, we also issued our report to Congress, which is the second report to Congress on the comparative analyses we've reviewed as required under the Consolidated Appropriations Act, and a fiscal year 2022 enforcement fact sheet. So the report and the fact sheet gives some insights into enforcement results that the departments have seen. And the report also talks about some priority areas of focus for the departments as they do enforce MAPIA, and some common deficiencies we're seeing in comparative analyses, with the hope that future comparative analyses will continue to improve so that we can, as we review them submitted by plans, we can get a better idea of any potential compliance problems that may be out there in plans and health insurance coverage. So I will turn it over to Kirsten.
Thanks, Beth, and good afternoon, everyone. Hope you can hear me. Let me know if there's an issue. I'm going to talk about a request for comment that we issued, the Center for Medicaid and CHIP Services, the Medicaid and CHIP part of CMS, on how we go about ensuring compliance with parity in the Medicaid and CHIP program. I can put a link to that request for comment in the chat after I provide my comments, but basically, we see ensuring compliance with parity as really fundamental for ensuring access to care for our enrollees who need mental health or substance use disorder treatment. As you may know, most provisions of MAPIA do apply to enrollees in Medicaid managed care organizations, in Medicaid alternative benefit plans, and in the Children's Health Insurance Program, CHIP. There's various statutory provisions that undergird that how MAPIA is carried over into Medicaid and CHIP that I won't go into. It's fairly complex, but we have worked very hard over the years to ensure that we have policies, regulations, guidance documents that really spell out the requirements in Medicaid and CHIP. We issued separate regulations, separate from the Department of Labor, CCIO, Department of Treasury regulations that Beth and Jacob are referring to. We have a separate set of regulations applying the parity requirements in Medicaid and CHIP that were issued in 2016. And as part of those regulations, we did put in place some documentation requirements, states that when a state splits up benefits between a managed care organization and other types of coverage, like for example, if some of the coverage is in fee-for-service, some in managed care, the state has to provide us with documentation of compliance and keep that up to date if there's any changes in that coverage. With regard to CHIP, there's also a requirement that states submit a state plan amendment and document how they are complying with parity in that state plan amendment. And there's a similar process for Medicaid alternative benefit plans. And so we do have some sort of similar processes to what Beth and Jacob were describing, but they are separate and distinct. But in light of these recent developments and statutory requirements around documentation that apply to private insurance, and also in light of concerns that we've heard recently from stakeholders regarding some situations where there appears to be a parity violation, as well as hearing from our stakeholders, the state Medicaid agencies, regarding the processes, the documentation requirements, et cetera. We did issue this request for comment on September 29th. And it does focus primarily on the processes that we are using. So, really trying to think if there's a way to streamline the upfront documentation aspect of ensuring compliance, and focus in on how do we identify through that document review, what are some red flags that we should be looking for, some key issues to be looking for, what NQTLs are most at risk for potentially having a parity compliance issue. And then also, trying to think about, are there measures or data points or other information we could be collecting and looking at to identify potential problems, and then really delve in when we think there is a potential violation. And so some examples are laid out in the request for comment to sort of really get folks thinking about what could be helpful. And some of those examples include things like comparisons of denial rates for mental health and SED versus medical and surgical, average appointment wait times, payment rates, time taken between receipt of a claim and payment of a claim, are how much, is there any difference in the degree to which mental health and SED providers are actively submitting claims versus medical surgical, trying to get at the issue of provider network adequacy. So those are some of the just examples that we threw out there, but really looking for input on kind of how to think about how do we identify when there's an issue, and really delve in those situations with using Parity as a tool to really ensure there's compliance there. So also just looking for suggestions around how to best collect that data. We do have some existing mechanisms, but looking to see if there are additional recommendations, or if there's alternative approaches that people would recommend, like random audits, for example. Those are some of the issues that we highlighted in this request for comment that I will put in the chat a link to, and just requesting that we receive those comments by December 4th. And this request for comment, I should point out, was posted on Medicaid.gov. So thank you very much. I think
All
turning it over to
all
David.
right. Thank you so much, Kirsten and Beth and Jacob. Really appreciate those updates, and so appreciate the collaboration and just your support and work on the ISMIC as well. And so now I'll go ahead and turn it over to David Dvorny and Dr. Sunny Patel, who will provide the report out for work group 5. So David and Sunny, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Dr. Delphin-Rittman. So I'm going to take the first half of our report out, and then I'm going to leave it to David to finish the second half. So we're going to be sort of speaking to the financing work group work. And next slide, please. And as you've just heard from our colleagues, Kirsten and Jacob and Beth, there's been tons of work done around Parity that is very exciting. We also have colleagues at ASPE, Dr. Judith Day, and SAMHSA colleagues as well, including Mitchell Berger, Abdullah Ibrahim, and would love to acknowledge Jennifer Masudi at DOJ, who's been integral, as well as Jenny Nate Cornelia and Amber Rivers at DOL as well. Our non-federal members are Dr. Brian Hepburn, Judge Stroud, and Dr. Catherine Warburton. And we've been meeting quite regularly on a monthly cadence, which has been very productive for us. Next slide, please. So our primary focus is to develop financing strategies to increase the availability and affordability of care. And our priorities in the past 6 months have largely been around revising final workgroup recommendations for vote by the ISMIC, which David will sort of reintroduce this go around, thinking about regulatory actions to advance parity, which we just discussed, and Medicare financing proposals to improve access and a launch of a National Academy of Medicine study, which I'll describe briefly. So, one of the things that we're very excited about is the launch of a National Academies of Medicine consensus study that we launched in partnership with our colleagues at CMS on increasing provider participation in Medicare, Medicaid, and the marketplace to really improve access to behavioral health care, and thinking about what are innovative financing strategies, as well as sort of more broadly thinking about ways that we're able to address this. Of course, there have been many efforts in this administration to address the challenges in accessing high quality mental health care, especially those with serious mental illness. And this is really to sort of advance the work on, we know that there are lots of issues around the number of providers that partake in public insurance, Medicare and Medicaid, and we know Medicaid is the largest payer, one of the largest payers of mental health care services. And so what are strategies that we ought to be sort of thinking about in increasing the number of behavioral health providers that partake in Medicare and Medicaid? And I think the top of mind sort of response would be, well, if we only increase the fee schedule, and that would result in more providers. And I think while that could be one solution, I think it's much more nuanced and complicated, and so which is why we really thought the objective, a systematic take from the National Academies would be very helpful for us. Next slide, please. So, there have been many advances on the mental health parity front. Of course, there was, if you've been following the news, the good work that Beth, Jacob, and our colleagues at Treasury have been doing together really was highlighted at a White House event with the president and others. And I know Dr. Delphin Rittman was there as well. And so I think that the fact that this work has really caught the public's consciousness is something that we're very proud of, and really think can move the ball on the care of individuals with SMI and SED. Next slide, please. Other sort of triumphs have been, in the the 24 physician fee schedule. There have been a number of changes that have made it in that address behavioral health financing issues. One is increased rates of Medicare payment rates for mental health providers, particularly around mental health, behavioral health integration. Another is in expanding the number of provider types that can bill Medicare directly. The third is around increasing the psychotherapy billing rates, which is a major advancement as well. Another piece that to highlight is there's been a coordinated specialty billing code that's been advanced, and I think that's really exciting because we know that the number of challenges in the wraparound services for individuals experiencing a first episode psychosis can be quite challenging. And so this billing code advance that's been sort of put forth is a major development as well. And then I'm going to turn it over to David to talk about all things CCBHCs and onwards. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Patel. And, just really exciting work that you talked about. I'm really excited. I'm looking forward to seeing the full National Academy of Medicine study that you mentioned. This is such an important issue we've been talking about for years. And I think digging into this level of detail is going to be really important. And just also like to highlight that study's been done and funded, I think, in partnership with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And so it's great to have a kind of cross HHS approach on this issue. And then just also like to highlight on that last slide, those Medicare rates, they really are important because oftentimes private providers, they look at those rates as a benchmark for what they're doing. And so I think it's really potential to have some really broad impact on reimbursement through those changes. So exciting developments. We've heard a lot about CCBHCs already today, so I'm not going to go on a lot of length. And I want to thank Dr. Everett and Dr. Vitus for their earlier presentations on CCBHCs. And so I'll jump off. You saw a map similar to this earlier, and sorry for this this kind of garish map. It's got a lot happening here, but that's good because all those different colors represent action, which is what we want to see. But Dr. Vitus put a slide up on the in her presentation that noted that there's now more than 500 CCBHCs across 46 states, Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico, which is really pretty amazing considering the first CCBHCs were established in 2017 in just 8 states. So that's a pretty large amount of growth in a relatively short period of time when you think about the time it usually takes to see system change. Dr. Vitus also mentioned the certification criteria earlier. And I just wanted to also highlight, in the realm of SMI and SED, we did update those criteria earlier this year. And part of those updates was to include a stronger focus on SMI and SED in several provisions. And so, we're not only just spreading the CCBHC initiative, we are also trying to focus it more on high needs populations, such as individuals who are experiencing serious mental illness or serious emotional disturbances. So I want to talk about what's happening at the state level with CCBHCs and get to this map. As you probably know, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act was passed in 2022, in June of 2022. And that was a really important piece of legislation for the CCBHC initiative. It put us on a path to add 10 more states to the CCBHC demonstration program. So that's 10 more states that are going to provide financing through Medicaid for CCBHCs through a cost-based prospective payment system, adding those 10 more states every 2 years starting in 2024. And so what that means is that we're going to see growth in the CCBHC model across the country. And that growth is going to go according to state interest. So we're going to be able to add states to the demonstration until we run out of states. And the good news is there's a lot of interested states. And so if you look at this map, there's a lot of different colors happening. So the bright red is those states that are already included in the CCBHC demonstration. You can see them highlighted across the map. The orange states, so are Nevada, Texas, and Kansas here. Those are states that, independent of the CCBHC demonstration, decided to work through Medicaid and then whatever mechanisms they already had available to create state CCBHC programs outside of the CCBHC demonstration. So they weren't going to wait around for the demonstration. The purple states, there's a lot of purple states on this map. They have either pursued state legislation, significant state action, or put state funding to developing CCBHCs outside of the CCBHC demonstration. Those teal states are states that are in our latest round of planning grants, and those are states that are going to be competing to join the demonstration in 2024. And then the final blue states, the dark blue states, are states that had a planning grant back in 2016. And taken together, this is 41 states that have taken state action to advance the CCBHC model. So it's not just the clinics that are popping up around the country as a result of our planning grants. There's really significant state action happening broadly across the country. And if you think about just 2 years into the future or 3 years into the future, we're going to be adding 10 states to the Medicaid demonstration in 2024 and another 10 in 2026. So that means by 2026, there will be a majority of states in the Medicaid demonstration for CCBHCs and a number of other states that have significant activity. So I'm just very hopeful because of the state efforts. States really drive systems. We don't have one system across the country. We have more than 50 with all the state systems and territorial systems. And so, this change has to happen at the state level. And the good news is states are really taking the CCBHC model seriously and taking concrete steps to pursue it. So that's the aspect of the CCBHC I wanted to highlight. So as far as trials, I wouldn't necessarily say we've had trials over the past 6 months, but I will say that we are working towards resolution of the issue that was raised at the last meeting. There was, I think, some discussion around one of our recommendations, 5.4. And so we've been working towards getting to final language on that recommendation. And so I think that's what we're going to bring up with you today. Let's see, can we go to the next slide? So we have updated language. You can see it on the screen here today. I'm not going to read through the updated recommendation, but I am going to talk about some of the changes that we've made to the recommendation. The first change that we had on this recommendation is the first sentence was a little colloquial before. It said it was hard to deliver the current financing practices made it hard to deliver a good mental health care. We changed that to made it hard to implement all of the mental health services required for people with serious mental illness. And so, strengthen the language a little bit there. We added new language to try and narrow and focus the language around the IMD exclusion in a number of ways. The first new language we added was that we added a recommendation to examine cost implications for a narrower IMD exclusion, such as removing crisis stabilization and short-term inpatient stays in order to inform the recommendations and explore current flexibilities in law. And so I think you'll see a theme here where we've moved away from a broad recommendation to eliminate the IMD exclusion towards a more nuanced approach to looking at possible exceptions to the IMD exclusion around crisis care and short-term stays. So the second modification here is we changed the recommendation, as I just said, to end the IMD exclusion to modify the exclusion of reimbursement and services under the IMD rule to allow for reimbursement of crisis stabilization beds and short-term hospitalization in the community. And then explicitly say we would like to continue to exclude long-term institutional beds such as state hospital beds from federal reimbursement under the IMD exclusion. So we recommend maintaining the IMD exclusion for longer term stays. We added language to focus current exceptions to the IMD exclusion. So we said we should work with states to implement programs under Medicaid waivers and managed care that allow for exceptions to the IMD exclusion for crisis stabilization beds and short-term hospitalization. Again, narrowing the scope to focus on crisis and short-term hospitalization. And then finally, to balance it out, to make it clear that we want to see people served in the community whenever possible, we added a sentence to support robust community mental health and substance use disorder treatment services and continuums of care to ensure people with serious mental illness and substance use disorders can be supported in non-institutional community settings and continue to support short-term hospitals and hospitalization and crisis stabilization. So again, trying to serve people in the community when possible. And then finally, we have a separate recommendation around parity, but we felt like parity is really important to mention here too. So we added a sentence to ensure compliance with mental health and substance use disorder parity laws and regulations. The good news is that internally to our work group, I don't know if you remember from our last meeting, but we did have some disagreement within our work group before we put forth the language last time. And the Department of Justice on our work group had included a note that they were not going to be able to concur with the recommendation. And so we put that forward to the work group last time with DOJ kind of abstaining from the Department of Justice abstaining from supporting that recommendation. The good news is after consulting their leadership and looking at the updated language, they now have removed that. So the DOJ is with us from the working group to advance this recommendation to the full ISMIC. And so with that explanation, we would like to present this recommendation to you for consideration, amended to kind of make it more nuanced and focused on not a complete elimination of the IMD exclusion, but more focused exceptions.
All right. Thank you so much, David. And really just to the full work group for your report out and for the work that you've done and just all the effort around sort of revising that language and then going back in terms of DOJ as well. So do want to open it up for questions. And it looks like we have a couple hands up already. So I'll start with Elliot and then we'll go to Brian. So Elliot.
Hi there. Thanks very much. And thanks for the conversation. I think one question that we have at ACL is if you could speak to sort of why the 1115 waiver process for IMDs seems insufficient. I mean, one of the things that we have appreciated about that is the guardrails there that require a state to build community-based mental health services, the sort of specifics around average length of stay, and sort of even in looking at the ways that you've narrowed it, it's like not intuitively clear to me why actually changing the IMD exclusion, like would that eliminate the 1115 waiver process for these specific services? And then also just we were interested in the sentence added about building community-based services or support for community-based services, but anything that you could say about what that means practically would be appreciated.
Sure. Well, I'll start with the second point first, and also I'd invite any of the other members of the working group to chime in because I wasn't the only person participating in these conversations. But on the first point, we just wanted to make it clear that our preference is for people to be served in the community first. We want people to be served in the least restrictive setting. That's our goal. We want people to be included in their communities. That's our goal also. And so we just tried to make it explicit in the recommendation. So that's why we included that language. As far as the 1115 waivers, one issue with the 1115 waivers is, there are kind of cost neutrality requirements and other administrative issues that may make it inappropriate or something that states can't do in some settings. We do actually support in the recommendation exploration of these waivers and exemptions and the possible use to address, areas where states may want to explore exceptions to the IMD exclusion. So, I don't think it's contradictory to that work. I think we just want to explore other options as well, because I know there are sometimes barriers to those 1115s. And I see that Dr. Hepburn has his hand up too, and he may have some thoughts.
Is it okay for me to go ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I put up my hand because I wanted to compliment SAMHSA and specifically David and Sunny for the discussion, because I think it became very clear as part of the discussion that what we were talking about in terms of the IMD and the exceptions was to do it in a way that decreased the risk of somebody going to long-term care, focusing on crisis services, which if somebody goes into a crisis bed, that they average less than 3 to 5 days. That seems like it should never have been considered an IMD in the first place, right? It was not consistent with the spirit of why the IMD was set up, which is to keep people out of longer term care. So I really wanted to thank the working group for the process. I thought we talked it through very well. And as David was saying, with the DOJ representatives, we were able to talk it through very well. And I think we feel very good with the language that we ended up with. So wanted to thank you for the process.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much for those comments, Brian. And so we have another comment as well, Rhonda.
Hi, as you may recall, last time we had aligned ourselves with DOJ in the way, and I think that the edits that have been made have addressed a lot of our concerns, but it was also my understanding, having been contacted by some people from DOJ yesterday, that there's still some issues with whether DOJ is supporting this. Parts of the agency that are not part of the group necessarily. So I'm not sure where that puts us procedurally, but I just wanted to let you know that that conversation is taking place.
We're certainly happy to. Sorry, Dr. Delfin, I'm going to get ahead of you. I just want to say we're happy to work with folks at DOJ. We did, consult with our representatives on the work group, and if there's other people who have concerns, we're certainly happy to work with them as well. But to our understanding, leadership in the Office of Civil Rights had signed off on this language as being acceptable. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much again to the work group and for the comments and questions as well. Any other comments or questions? Otherwise, we'll go. Anita, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to be clear for members that this may not be obvious, but it may be obvious, but just in case, this does not establish a federal official or administration policy. This is really the focus of the work of ISMIC, and the group wants to sort of parse out what IMD applies to, and so I guess you could say this vote would be the position of ISMIC, accepting the recommendations of the work group or not accepting them, but it's not official federal or administrative policy.
Yeah, no,
I don't know, Dave. Yeah, Dave, if you want to add anything to that, what exactly the standing of this recommendation is.
Yeah, that's right. So this is a recommendation from ISMIC to the federal government. And just a reminder, this is the original recommendation, under the earlier, as Mick, under the last administration was a full elimination of the IMD exclusion. So we've significantly kind of revised, I think, and made much more narrow the previous recommendation with this updated language.
Yeah. Now, thank you for that clarification. Any other questions or comments? Corey, yeah.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate Rhonda's comment. And I would like to know if the representative for this working group from DOJ is present today and able to share the current state or status of the DOJ's position in regards to this revised language. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that comment, Corey. So do we have anyone from DOJ on the call now?
Yes, my name is Nicole Njumale. I'm the new designee for DOJ. I'm not on the working group, so I'm not sure that our working group representative is there, but we are clarifying our position on this and we'll be back to the group momentarily.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Because I think if not, we can
Corey, is your hand up again?
Oh, that's yep, Corey, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Just for clarification, does that mean that this will be held until the next meeting to have the opportunity to discuss this further? Or I see Nicole is back on, or were you going to get clarification for today? Because it's my understanding this is up for a vote today.
Yeah, I think that's an important question. So Nicole, I don't know if you have information back yet. It sounded like you were looking to get response. I know you said momentarily, but if you have a response, then if not, then we can perhaps make a motion to hold. But I'll turn it over to you if you have any updates there.
Sure. Yes, as I said, we are clarifying our position on this. And so if there's opportunity to hold, we would appreciate that.
Okay. All right. That sounds good. That sounds good. So so then why don't we go ahead with a vote on the report, and then we'll make a motion in terms of the recommendation itself as well. So can I have a motion to accept the working group report? So this is separate from the recommendation.
So moved.
Okay, thank you. And can I get a second?
Second.
All right, thank you. And all in favor say aye.
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 Okay, great. And any objections? Okay, right. So this, the report is accepted. And then in terms of holding, I think we do a vote for that as well. Is that what do we do? I think we do a vote.
We can vote to hold the recommendation yeah.
Okay, for
Can,
further
can we talk
clarification.
about, is it okay to talk about that, to have a discussion about it? Because we went through this before and then we did the work in the work group. We brought it back and now we're at the same place. We feel like we've come to some good language. DOJ was there, they were represented, they agreed with the language.
Yeah.
This is an important position for us that are working in the 988 and crisis services. This is an important message that 3 to 5 days in a crisis program is not the same as an IMD. So I just want to state that I'm opposed to waiting on something that we've been working on for months and have come up with common language that people agreed to. So if we're going to do something different, if it's going to go back to the work group, I would like to know what is going to be different. It just seems like we've got some people that are boycotting the work that we've done. So I guess that's my question is, where do we go with this?
Yeah, it's a good point, Brian, because I think what you're saying is, the work group worked on the specific comments related to the recommendation, throughout the last few months. And so the work group's work on it is done. And so it sounds like the clarification we're waiting for is the position from DOJ, which doesn't necessarily change the language, but it's just bringing that to the group in terms of what DOJ's thought is or opinion is on the recommendation.
I do think the work group had input from DOJ on this, so isn't that right?
That's what it sounded like.
Yeah,
That's right. We had a representative, and she was really diligent in going back and forth, as I understand it, with her leadership, whether or not there are other areas of DOJ outside of civil rights, or there's some miscommunication. This is kind of late breaking news for us, but we want to make sure that people feel comfortable with the language. But at the same time, I think Brian is correct. We have tried to kind of move to a much more narrow position, and we're here. I'm here to just kind of serve as a facilitator for the process. I'm not here to express a view, so I'm happy to do whatever the group would like to do. So, and that's what the work group will do too, of course, is to follow the direction of the broader ISMEC.
Yeah.
And my understanding is that is correct, that DOJ understands and appreciates that the proposal has been narrowed in many respects and often in response to DOJ's concerns. And we appreciate that process and the narrowing that has happened. I think there are still some concerns that remain for DOJ, and that we have moved from opposing to, at this point, I think rather than asking to hold another vote, would be that DOJ would just abstain from the vote.
Okay. Thank you so much, Nicole. That was really helpful to get that clarification. So why don't we move forward with the vote? Our folks will move forward with the vote. DOJ will abstain, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, I think it might be helpful that when we do vote, that we explicitly ask for those who are in favor, opposed, and abstaining. So we just have that for the record, to hear that after the motion.
Okay. So we'll go through with each of those. Okay. So can I get a motion to accept the updated language in this in recommendation 5.4?
So moved.
Thank you. Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you. So all in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay. Any nays? Okay, and any abstentions?
ACL abstains.
Okay. That's
DOJ abstains.
Okay.
And Corey Minor-Smith, HUD, abstains.
Okay. Any others? Okay, thank you. So we have 3 abstentions, and then the rest of the committee is in favor. So thank you for that, everybody. Any other? So I believe we are now done with the work group report outs. And so I just want to, just pause before we go to public comment, and just so thank the work group members, the chairs, and the members on each of the work groups, just for the really important work that you've done, and even for that rich discussion that we just had, even on the, on that particular recommendation. I think it really shows that the ISMEC members, like everyone, is like really leaning in on just getting the work right.